All right. So, the day has finally arrived. Welcome. I have some really cheap champagne with me, here to celebrate the end of our long national nightmare. And I got the PBS NewsHour feed going on. Lady Gaga has just sung, and it's interesting to see how some collaboration with Tony Bennett and a movie career can change your public image. Just to be clear, I do like Lady Gaga. I'm not trying to trash her, but it's something strange to think about where her career was at a decade ago, where her image was out a decade ago, and then to see her singing the national anthem at an inauguration. And now somebody is apparently signing an ALS. I muted this so I could talk. Thomas Reed, you said I've been watching since 2009 or something. I thought that had something to do with you've been watching this stream or you've been watching the inauguration. I'm like, it hasn't been that long. The new nightmare starts. Of course. Here we go. You know what? I lived through 8 years. I was going to say, after 8 years of the histrionics from Republicans about Obama, remember when they were all saying that he was going to stay in office by declaring martial law and overturning the election? Doesn't that seem rather quaint now? Now all these people are saying, "Oh, Joe Biden's going to ruin." I mean, they're saying the exact same things they say about if any Democrat took office. It's the same exaggerations and scaremongering. No, Democrats are not going to crater the economy. Not only because their tax policies would not do that even if they were enacted, because radical tax policies are not going to be enacted with a 50-50 Senate. Okay? Chill. All right. Well, I think, see, now we got Jennifer Lopez. This is turning into like a graduation. I have to say that I personally hate graduation ceremonies because they're usually held sometime in early summer, late spring. They're hot, they're stuffy, and just people prattle on for like 3 hours. And I understand the pomp and circumstance that they're going for, but at the same time, it's like, oh no, here's another thing to fill 5 minutes till we get to the 12 o'clock deadline. You're from the UK, Thomas Reed. You're from the UK. So how is the Brexit thing going? Because it seems like I haven't followed it very closely, but it seems to me like there are some people who are starting to realize, like, wait a minute, this isn't what the ads on the side of the bus made it out to be. Which, obviously, I mean, what did the sign say that they would save? How many billions of dollars going back to the NHS if they didn't give it, send it to Brussels? And personally, I don't understand how anyone could believe that their politicians would, even if they were to come into money, that they would not have somehow waste that money. Like, there's a politician who has met a pence they couldn't waste. Not a Mike Pence, but like pence the British coin. There's, yeah. A lot of the premise, on one hand, okay. So on one hand, the European Union was set up primarily as a trade relationship between Germany and France. And Britain, for economic and political reasons, was always sort of an outlier and always sort of an odd fit. So I don't necessarily think that Brexit was, in theory, the worst thing ever. Although, I'm not an expert in European politics or British politics and, the economy of the EU in England. But at the same time, the pro-Brexit campaign, it was just built on things that, like I said, like the whole, we're going to save X amount of money on the money that we're going to be able to give back to the NHS and all these things. And just built on a whole lot of promises that I think that any savvy person would have been like, no, even if Brexit succeeds, that's not going to happen. Even if they do get some sort of new trade deal, if it's less than a common market, then it's going to create all kinds of nightmares and headaches. And they're thinking, oh, all these regulations and all these other things that we have to deal with. It's how do you think you're suddenly not going to have to deal with those regulations? The only way that they would not have to deal with the sort of regulations that people were complaining about is if they stopped trading with the EU altogether, which would cause the British economy to just crater. So that wasn't going to happen. So they were going to get something like the Common Market Light as a trade deal. Even still, I'm hearing about problems with it. Just all of the, as I said, on one hand, I understand how, the UK was always a sort of strange fit for the EU, but at the same time, all of the promises that the pro-Brexit camp made was just, that's things that were never actually going to pan out the way as, it wasn't going to do what it said on the tin. The nightmare is just getting started. Yeah, Paul, you might want to say something slightly more original than the person a little bit above you in the comments. Christ, that's a big Bible. What's strange, though, is as I understand it, he doesn't technically become president until for 10 more minutes. So this happened sooner than I thought. I thought they were just going to do more stuff to waste another 10 minutes. Like, what other celebrity singer can we get out here? This is my super classy, totally not a champagne glass. I was probably going to take him 10 minutes at least to give a speech, so by the time he's done his speech, he'll, I think, officially be president. I do see your comments in the comment section, and we'll respond once he's given his speech. Oh, that was muted the whole time. Jeez. That's just getting weird looking back in the stream. Apologies for having the desktop audio muted. They're just killing time with dead air now.
My fellow Americans, a moment we have all been waiting for. It is now my great privilege and high honor to be the first person to officially introduce the 46th President of the United States, Joseph R. Biden, Jr.
Chief Justice Roberts, Vice President Harris, Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, Vice President Pence, and my distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. This is America's day. This is democracy's day, a day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Through a crucible for the ages, America has been tested anew, and America has risen to the challenge. Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause of democracy. The people, the will of the people, has been heard, and the will of the people has been heeded. We've learned again that democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. So now, on this hallowed ground where just a few days ago, violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundation, we come together as one nation, under God, indivisible, to carry out the peaceful transfer of power as we have for more than 2 centuries. As we look ahead in our uniquely American way, restless, bold, optimistic, and set our sights on the nation we know we can be and we must be. I thank my predecessors of both parties for their presence here today. I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And I know the resilience of our Constitution and the strength of our nation, as does President Carter, who I spoke with last night, who cannot be with us today, but whom we salute for his lifetime in service. I've just taken the sacred oath each of those patriots have taken. The oath first sworn by George Washington. But the American story depends not on any one of us, not on some of us, but on all of us, on we the people who seek a more perfect union. This is a great nation. We are good people. And over the centuries, through storm and strife, in peace and in war, we've come so far, but we still have far to go. We'll press forward with speed and urgency, for we have much to do in this winter of peril and significant possibilities. Much to repair, much to restore, much to heal, much to build, and much to gain. Few people in our nation's history have been more challenged or found a time more challenging or difficult than the time we're in now. Once-in-a-century virus that silently stalks the country. It's taken as many lives in 1 year as America lost in all of World War II. Millions of jobs have been lost. Hundreds of thousands of businesses closed. A cry for racial justice, some 400 years in the making, moves us. The dream of justice for all will be deferred no longer. A cry for survival comes from the planet itself, a cry that can't be any more desperate or any more clear. And now, a rise of political extremism, white supremacy, domestic terrorism, that we must confront and we will defeat. To overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause. Uniting to fight the foes we face: anger, resentment and hatred, extremism, lawlessness, violence, disease, joblessness, and hopelessness. With unity, we can do great things, important things. We can right wrongs. We can put people to work in good jobs. We can teach our children in safe schools. We can overcome the deadly virus. We can reward work and rebuild the middle class and make health care secure for all. We can deliver racial justice, and we can make America once again the leading force for good in the world. I know speaking of unity can sound to some like a foolish fantasy these days. I know the forces that divide us are deep and they are real. But I also know they are not new. Our history has been a constant struggle between the American ideal that we're all are created equal and the harsh, ugly reality that racism, nativism, fear, demonization have long torn us apart. The battle is perennial, and victory is never assured. Through Civil War, the Great Depression, World War, 9/11, through struggle, sacrifice, and setbacks, our better angels have always prevailed. In each of these moments, enough of us have come together to carry all of us forward. And we can do that now. History, faith, and reason show the way of unity. We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. No progress, only exhausting outrage. No nation, only a state of chaos. This is our historic moment of crisis and challenge, and unity is the path forward. And we must meet this moment as the United States of America. If we do that, I guarantee you we will not fail. We have never, ever, ever, ever failed in America when we've acted together. And so today, at this time, in this place, let's start afresh, all of us. Let's begin to listen to one another again, hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics doesn't have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. And we must reject the culture in which facts themselves are manipulated and even manufactured. My fellow Americans, we have to be different than this. America has to be better than this. And I believe America is so much better than this. Just look around. Here we stand in the shadow of the Capitol Dome, as was mentioned earlier, completed amid the Civil War, when the Union itself was literally hanging in the balance. Yet we endured. We prevailed. Here we stand, looking out on the great mall where Dr. King spoke of his dream. Here we stand where 108 years ago, at another inaugural, thousands of protesters tried to block brave women marching for the right to vote. And today, we mark the swearing in of the first woman in American history elected to national office, Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't tell me things can't change. Here we stand, across the Potomac from Arlington Cemetery, where heroes who gave the last full measure of devotion rest in eternal peace. And here we stand, just days after a riotous mob thought they could use violence to silence the will of the people, to stop the work of our democracy, to drive us from this sacred ground. It did not happen. It will never happen. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Not ever. To all those who supported our campaign, I'm humbled by the faith you've placed in us. To all those who did not support us, let me say this. Hear me out as we move forward. Take a measure of me and my heart. And if you still disagree, so be it. That's democracy. That's America. The right to dissent peaceably within the guardrails of our republic is perhaps this nation's greatest strength. Yet hear me clearly. Disagreement must not lead to disunion. And I pledge this to you. I will be a president for all Americans. All Americans. And I promise you, I will fight as hard for those who did not support me as for those who did. Many centuries ago, St. Augustine, a saint of my church, wrote that a people was a multitude defined by the common objects of their love. Defined by the common objects of their love. What are the common objects we as Americans love that define us as Americans? I think we know. Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. Recent weeks and months have taught us a painful lesson. There is truth and there are lies. Lies told for power and for profit. And each of us has a duty and a responsibility as citizens, as Americans, and especially as leaders who have pledged to honor our Constitution and protect our nation, to defend the truth and defeat the lies. Look, I understand that many of my fellow Americans view the future with fear and trepidation. I understand they worry about their jobs. I understand, like my dad, they lay at bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, can I keep my health care? Can I pay my mortgage? Thinking about their families, about what comes next. I promise you, I get it. But the answer is not to turn inward, to retreat into competing factions, distrusting those who don't look like you, or worship the way you do, or don't get their news from the same sources you do. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural versus urban, conservative versus liberal. We can do this if we open our souls instead of hardening our hearts, if we show a little tolerance and humility, and if we're willing to stand in the other person's shoes, as my mom would say, just for a moment, stand in their shoes. Because here's the thing about life. There's no accounting for what fate will deal you. Some days, when you need a hand. There are other days when we're called to lend a hand. That's how it has to be. That's what we do for one another. And if we are this way, our country will be stronger, more prosperous, more ready for the future. And we can still disagree. My fellow Americans, in the work ahead of us, we're going to need each other. We need all our strength to persevere through this dark winter. We're entering what may be the toughest and deadliest period of the virus. We must set aside politics and finally face this pandemic as one nation. One nation. And I promise you this, as the Bible says, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. We will get through this together. Together. Look, folks, all my colleagues I serve with in the House and the Senate up here, we all understand the world is watching all of us today. So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. We'll be a strong and trusted partner for peace, progress, and security. Look, you all know we've been through so much in this nation. And in my first act as president, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silent prayer. Remember all those who we lost in this past year to the pandemic. Those 400,000 fellow Americans, moms, dads, husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and co-workers. We'll honor them by becoming the people and the nation we know we can and should be. So I ask you, let's say a silent prayer for those who've lost their lives and those left behind, and for our country. Amen. Folks, This is a time of testing. We face an attack on our democracy and on truth, a raging virus, growing inequity, the sting of systemic racism, a climate in crisis, America's role in the world. Any one of these would be enough to challenge us in profound ways. But the fact is, we face them all at once, presenting this nation with one of the gravest responsibilities we've had. Now we're going to be tested. Are we going to step up, all of us? It's time for boldness, for there is so much to do. And this is certain. I promise you, we will be judged, you and I, by how we resolve these cascading crises of our era. We will rise to the occasion is the question. Will we master this rare and difficult hour? Will we meet our obligations and pass along a new and better world to our children? I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next great chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. There's one verse that stands out, at least for me, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let me know in my heart when my days are through. America, America, I gave my best to you. Let's us add our own work and prayers to the unfolding story of our great nation. If we do this, then when our days are through, our children and our children's children will say of us, they gave their best, they did their duty, they healed a broken land. My fellow Americans, I close the day where I began, with the sacred oath. Before God and all of you, I give you my word. I will always level with you. I will defend the Constitution. I'll defend our democracy. I'll defend America. And I will give all of you, keep everything I do in your service, thinking not of power, but of possibilities, not of personal interest, but the public good. And together, we shall write an American story of hope, not fear, of unity, not division, of light, not darkness, a story of decency and dignity, love and healing, greatness and goodness. May this be the story that guides us, the story that inspires us, and the story that tells ages yet to come that we answered the call of history. We met the moment. Democracy and hope, truth and justice did not die on our watch but thrived. That America secured liberty at home and stood once again as a beacon to the world. That is what we owe our forebears, one another, and generation to follow. So, with purpose and resolve, we turn to those tasks of our time, sustained by faith, driven by conviction, and devoted to one another and the country we love with all our hearts. May God bless America, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, America.
You know, I used to own a vinyl record that had the inauguration speeches of past presidents. It seemed a bit lengthy, but... So anyway, Gerbs96 in the chats. I have a question. By 1996, is 96 1996? So you were approximately 24 to 25 years old.
Please welcome Garth Brooks to perform Amazing Grace.
Yeah, Garth Brooks. I have a secret soft spot for Garth Brooks, but I'm going to mute it right now. So You're approximately 24. No, so that's... How old are you then? Just out of curiosity. Because it seems to me as if you're just... I'm thinking back to 36. Okay, so you are more than old enough to remember 8 years of Obama, right? And yet you sound like the same broken record that we heard, 12 years ago when Obama took office. Repeating the same Ayn Rand, road to serfdom sorts of things that we've heard over and over again. And I'm honestly curious what someone like you thinks of the fact that in previous times in America, there were higher tax rates, stricter regulations, greater, more robust social programs, and it did not turn into the economic hellscape that you're describing. And I also want to ask, do you seriously think that with the likely tepid bills that a 50-50 Senate is able to pass, that they'll be able to pass some crippling economic, tax rates and regulations? Do you think any of that stuff will actually happen, given the actual composition of the government as it stands now? Or are you just saying, or are you basically projecting the most radical things you've ever heard a Democrat say onto Joe Biden? Do I seriously think we can spend our way into prosperity? Oh, Milton Friedman. So basically, okay. So you have drunk the libertarian economic Kool-Aid, is what I'm hearing. Do you not think that the Republican voters are incentivized to think like Bernie voters? What? I'm not even sure what you mean. So the thing about the sort of libertarian economics that you're talking about is that we've had basically 40 years of the sort of ideas you're talking about. You got full-on versions with Republican presidents. You get the light versions with Democratic presidents, and it is, amongst other things, has created this sort of wealth inequality and the outsourcing of jobs through trade deals and all the things that have created the economic unrest amongst people that have driven people to different corners like Bernie or to Trump. The economic populism, the economic anxiety of these people that alleged Trump voters have, right? And I just don't see how we basically seen these policies in action, and they've been great for a very small percentage of people and not so great for most people. And in previous times, when tax rates were higher, where regulations were strict, where unions were more robust, the economy just did fine, but for a lot more people. The economic doomsaying of these people, it has no... I don't want to say that it has no basis in reality, but we don't have any examples to actually point to within our own country. It is all a hypothetical slippery slope based on worst case scenarios. And it gets absolutely exhausting to listen to people like, oh my God, they might raise the taxes slightly. We're on the road to serfdom. Like, please calm down. Calm down. I know that you've absorbed Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and probably Ayn Rand and all of these other people, but have you ever seriously given consideration to any other economic point of view? Socialism is bad in all forms. Especially bad in what sense? Bad for whom? What do you define as socialism? It said, okay, so socialism is a planned economy. Who is planning the economy exactly? See, I, in general sense, am in agreement with you. If our government was run by, if our economy was run by government commissars, then yeah, we would probably have a situation in which, when we ran out of toilet paper, we would probably still be waiting for toilet paper from the last time there was a run on toilet paper. In the Soviet Union, there was a constant shortage. Yeah, we probably shouldn't have government commissars creating production quotas. But planned economy, we don't have a planned economy. So what are you even talking about? Antitrust lawyers of big tech? This government is going to be picking winners and losers. Antitrust lawyers of big tech. So artificial internet rates are? Could you? Okay. This conversation is just a lot of vague. This overall idea that you can separate government completely from the economy seems naive. I don't know how else to put it. For example, take the financial system, right? The financial system and the government are interwoven in such a way that when you think about business and banks and finance, that you can't completely sort one from the other. There is not an entirely private economy. It seems obvious to say, but we have a mixed economy. We have regulations, often for good reasons, and we have other regulations that are basically created by corporate lobbyists to try and exclude competition. And you have government investing in infrastructure. There are countless ways in which government and the economy are intertwined that even if you could separate them, the assumption that a lot of the, the far libertarian people seem to assume is that we could have more or less what we have now, only better. If only government stood in the way, there would be more money to be made, more jobs, more everything we have now, but better. What I think is that you would have to imagine something radically different. And anyone who has these sorts of let's get government completely out of the equation ideas, who isn't imagining something truly radically different, simply just doesn't understand these issues in quite a granular enough fashion. They've heard these oftentimes oversimplified arguments from certain right-wing economists and the Friedmanites and all of these other sorts of people. And it's like, oh, things would just be better if we got government out of this and government out of that. But it's more of a Gordian knot than that. Free markets are liberal ideas, mind you. I mean, the word liberal, lowercase liberal, is really overused because it basically describes a type of government that the entire Western world is on that spectrum. The entire democratic world. I think people try and just like play. They try and obfuscate the difference between liberal, capital L liberal, lowercase l liberal. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have drank some champagne before I tried to argue with people, but all right, who they got now? Another poet? What are my thoughts on the SolarWinds cyber attack?
Faith gathered in this historical moment. Let us unite in prayer.
Tool Time gets his info from corporate news. Where, pray tell, do you get your info from? From some anonymous person on 4chan? I'm sure that's 100% reliable. This insulting of other people because they have a different opinion as you. Well, this is something that I've experienced for years. You don't think that 9/11 was an inside job? Well, you just must not believe the government's capable of it. There's a ready-made, thought-terminating cliche to explain away how the other person who disagrees with you must be either stupid or believing lies. And, he watches corporate news. You have no idea where I get my information. And your contrarian ideas do not magically become correct because you read it on 4chan or wherever you get your news. Joe Q. Citizen Journalist with his iPhone or whatever. You're watching this on your phone. Why? It's interesting how many people in the comment section of this seem to be here to hate watch.
Just grasping reconciliation.
At work, unlike some people. Okay, so to be clear, I have a job. I just have a different schedule than you. I'm not saying you are being a hater. There was somebody else who was being a hater, Gerbs96, but I don't know. It's difficult to argue with somebody who has this any sort of radical opinion, whether it's right or left, where I'm not unfamiliar with the sorts of ideas that you're talking about. It's not as if I've never heard the ideas of Hayek or Friedman or Ayn Rand before. But just trying to talk people out of extremes with, like, okay, I understand that it's one thing to disagree. It's another thing to just say, like, to paint a doomscape worst possible scenario out of everything. So, for example, what I'm saying is, whatever you may think of the Democrats or Joe Biden, they're unlikely to be able to pass any sort of radical tax hikes or any sort of genuinely radical, regulations. You already have experience of 8 years of Obama, and I just don't see what it is you think is going to lead to, economic serfdom or all these things. Like, how is that actually, in practical terms, going to happen? I don't see that. I think it sounds like the most outrageous hyperbole that is utterly exhausting to listen to, because I don't even know if I should take you seriously, or if you're just repeating, the mantras of a certain point of view. Democrats will ruin the economy. I mean, they didn't under Clinton. They didn't under Barack Obama. it's funny because I'm half waiting for the Democrats and liberals in the comments section, or leftists to show up in the comments section and start telling you that no, Joe Biden's not radical enough. So you have one group of people saying that it's all going to be doom and more doom and even more doom because Joe Biden's going to implement a radical agenda that will crush the American economy. And then you have another group of people on the opposite side who are saying, no, he's not going to do enough. It's just going to be more neoliberal appeasement of the corporatists. And it's cliche to say the truth is somewhere in the middle, but sometimes, yeah, I think it's accurate to say the truth is much closer to the middle than either of those things. You're an equities trader and investor. So basically, you're worried more about your own bottom line than the rest of the country. I guess, okay, the economic circumstances right now were frightening. Yeah, no, you're right. They are. You're absolutely right. There's something you might have heard of called a pandemic. You're worried about the poor, and you're an equities trader and investor? Oh. Okay, so have you ever read, what is the title of the book? Winners Take All. It's about how the rich use their philanthropy in ways that basically do not confront the underlying societal issues of like poverty, that they're more feel-good, self-serving projects. I mean, that's probably a poor description of what he's getting at, but it's a pretty interesting book. My basic perspective is that for the last 40 years, we've tried what the kids today, what the insufferable liberal people, probably called neoliberal economic policies. That's the buzzword, right? And pretty much under most circumstances, everything within, to a high degree, especially when you compare it to, the decades prior, especially the 50s, the 60s, the government policy has been bent over backwards to try and accommodate big business under these rising tide lifts all boats Reaganomics, that tax cuts will trickle down prosperity to other to the people at the bottom, that trade deals will be good for America. All of these policies that really bent over backwards in favor of business created vast inequality. And what it created for most of America, for the vast majority of America, is devastated hometowns that were gutted when their industries moved away to somewhere with cheaper labor, and to stagnating wages, to lowered standards of living, to declining quality of life and age expectancy. And we're expected to believe that more of the same would somehow fix that. Reagan cut taxes. Bush Sr., somehow made the mistake of trying to balance the budget. But Reagan created a deficit. Clinton had to clean it up. Bush created a deficit and had tax cuts. Obama had to clean it up. Now who knows if Biden will even try and play that game. But I just don't see how for the broad majority of Americans, how we can continue one way or the other. I don't see how we can continue going down the same road we have for the last 40 years when it clearly hasn't worked. Big business and collusion is not capitalism, it's cronyism. Okay, here's my thing. What do you expect? This is, I think we've arrived at the heart of why I cannot get behind these libertarian ideas, because they believe in people pursuing their own self-interest, right? But here's the thing. If you're a business or a rich person, pursuing your own self-interest is to use your wealth and power to leverage that to put government at your service and to bend it in your favor and to game the system. People, the libertarians and the economic right love to talk about, it's crony capitalism, it's corporatism. What do you expect from people pursuing their own interests when wealth is allowed to accumulate and that wealth is allowed to be translated into political power? The corporatism of the government, the crony capitalism, is merely an extension of them pursuing their own self-interest. This is exactly what we should expect. There is no pure form of capitalism that would eradicate this. Big business should not be protected. They should rise and fall on their ability to serve their customers. It's like you want to grow an economy in a petri dish or something. That's just not... It's never going to be that way. There's never going to be some pure form of capitalism with no, working the refs, with no gaming the system in their favor, with no trying to find the cheat codes. And I guess this is something that you sort of learn to understand if you're like me and you've played, competitive games for decades of your life, is that there's always going to be that element to the game of playing the other players, of working the refs, of trying to, exploit the features of the meta, or whatever you want to say. Okay, so Gerbs, what precisely do you think that Joe Biden is going to do that is going to specifically wreck the economy? Because this, you're just like, it's going to ruin the economy, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. That's kind of what you sound like, but I haven't heard much in specifics other than speaking in very, very general terms about the, these right, you're paying lip service to right-wing economic ideas. What is going on here? Free markets are a liberal idea. So when I was in college, I minored in political science, and I took a class called Liberalism and Its Critics. And so I know what, people talk about classical liberalism, and I think most of them have never actually read the works of classical liberals, because I had to, so I know what they said. And or I at least read many of their works, so I have some good idea of what classical liberals had to say. And I think it's just basically this game people try and play where it's like, well, I don't want to call myself conservative. That's not cool. That's not like the buzzwords of the moment have sort of turned against calling yourself conservative. So I'm going to call myself classical liberal. That sounds so much better. It sounds so much more palatable for the people on the fence who aren't quite ready to embrace the label conservatism. So when you say, like, free markets are a liberal idea, it's kind of like, As I said a little while ago, yeah, pretty much any sort of democratic system is basically liberal, given what small L liberal means. So, The economy is based on savings and investment. That's an interesting look. I'm not going to pretend to be an economist. I have a cousin who has a PhD in economics, but as I understand it, right, our our economy has shifted over to what they call the service sector, and the big generator in the economy is what they call the FIRE sector: finance, insurance, real estate, and what's the other one? Anyway, and the sort of hearing you say that it's based on savings and investment, it almost seems kind of quaint, and it's not the government that really made that happen, or maybe you could make an argument that it was, but it seems to me that it was more that the economy itself transformed into something that moved away from what someone like you would seem to call fundamental principles. Okay, so thanks to all the printing of money and cheap debt, the wealthy have never had it better. While inflation goes into asset classes and the grocery store, wealth inequality will go through the roof. We went from a creditor nation to a debtor nation. Yeah, honestly, the concept of money is something that has fascinated me more and more over the years, and in particularly fiat currency, because as you're alluding to, there's some facet of the economy that you can point to and say, this is the brass tacks that money represents. The labor power, or the potential labor power in the economy, and the physical, what do they call them, capital goods, or what would you call, is it called real capital? Let's say you own a factory or a warehouse. There's a specific term for that. There are real there are real physical objects that exist. There is the potential of that, and yet you can't, so you could boil what money represents down to relatively tangible things. But then there's this whole other layer over the top of that, which is what I like to call future money, which is what a lot of you seem to be alluding to about how the wealthy have gotten wealthier by creating this a world based on investment. So a bank can just create money out of thin air on the assumption that this will be value generated in the future and then paid back at interest. And a lot of it is, when you hear that, the stock market crashed and $1 trillion was wiped out, $1 trillion of value was wiped out. My understanding of something like that is obviously not that they take dump trucks full of $100 bills out to the desert in New Mexico and burn them or something like that, but it was more like those were losses that were written off because it was money that was projected it was money that was created based on the projection that it was going to exist, and then the realization came that value was never in fact going to be created, so they just had to write it off the books, and so the value vanished because unlike capital goods or other sorts of capital assets, that it was like, well, this is this never happened, it's not going to happen. Have you ever heard of Gerbs? Have you ever heard of new monetary theory? becomes... What are they doing now? I realize I've been ranting rather than paying attention to this stuff. I'll look something up real quick. Oh, in modern monetary theory, that's what it's called. Yeah. Yeah, modern monetary theory. I'm not... It's an interesting idea. I should absolutely say right up front that I'm in no way sold on that idea, and I'm not like, yes, we should totally implement this. But the book that I read on that was amongst the things that, although, again, I didn't really completely buy into the idea, the perspective that it had on, fiat currency was interesting, and it helped me sort of crystallize certain ideas that, or notions that I had about it, even if I didn't really, I can't endorse the theory. But honestly, this is one of those subjects where I try not to go too far in what I say, because I realize the scope of my own ignorance, and I also like the sort of things that I have put together sound a bit like they could sound a bit not conspiratorial, but like a bit tinfoil hat. That's not even the right way, but a bit less than clear and factual. But I think it was that book. I don't remember the name of the book about MMT, but it was talking about how a village in I think it was Switzerland during the Depression just decided to create their own money, and were able to get their economy going just based on making their own money. And just the very concept of how something like fiat currency works, and how how value is represented is an interesting idea. And if anybody has any other books to recommend on that subject, then I'd be interested in checking those out. Do I play StarCraft 2? No. I think that, let's see. I mean, I played the original StarCraft years ago, but it's been a long, long time since I played StarCraft. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, they did similar programs. I'm not certain that's true, but I think you're vastly oversimplifying, because they had a lot of other programs. It wasn't one thing that MMT only works insofar as we remain the global reserve currency. As I understand it, the idea was that as long as we're a sovereign state that can print our own money, I don't even know. I've been so busy responding to a person in the comment section, I'm not even sure. Somebody's driving away. So there's some sort of meet and greet at the front of, I don't even know what building this is. Is this a Capitol building? Doesn't look like it.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Almost finished.
The last time I was in D.C. with my brother, we parked near, I don't even remember, it was the Department of something. And my brother was like, what does that department even do? And I was like, I have no idea. And I can't even remember what the department was anymore. deficits and debt don't matter. Wasn't that the Reaganite slogan? Deficits don't matter. Again, going off of what I read in the book about MMT, it does not say that deficits and debt completely don't matter. There is an upper limit to how much you can create. And the upper limit is, like the judge of that upper limit has more to do with inflation than it does with the actual size of the debt. What is even... I don't even know what's happening. Is that Clinton? The Clintons? They're walking into a building. No, it's like the family reunion from hell or something. I want to see if there's... okay, let's see what's going on the other networks or something. Let me open a different tab. I'll open it on this side. And I'll move it over. Let's see. Who else? This is... yeah. Oh my God. Let's drag this over. NBC talking heads. Oh boy. Over the last few days, it's become kind of insufferable to listen to a lot of this stuff that there's a certain type of political reporter that when you hear them talk about some of the pageantry, it's almost like embarrassingly earnest. You know, like they're picking out every little detail and trying to show their historical knowledge and you know, frame everything that's being said in like this really melodramatic context. Like here, let's...
wrapped himself in the story of America that sort of has a true north. And it was sort of an attempt to, look, you can't erase the chapter of the last 4 years, but you can put a marker down and show that we've moved forward. And I just think it is important to say the fact that he said white supremacy, and he talked about it as a scourge in this country, and to be the first president to do it, I also think that's just an important marker that years from now will be looked back on as an important inflection point that an American president set.
Let's talk about the historical significance of every word he said. I got to admit, they're better at filling airtime than I am, clearly. But I don't know. There's only so much. Yeah, I understand people are like, oh, the lamestream media. And I'll tell you a secret. I mostly watch the PBS NewsHour. I'll watch a wide variety of snippets from other stations and read various articles from a variety of places. But a lot of this talking head stuff, especially when they're like the political junkies that let's talk about the historic significance of the fact that Joe Biden mentioned white supremacists in his inauguration speech. And, they're looking for that definitive moment where, they say, we have nothing to fear but fear itself, or ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. That's absolutely terrible Kennedy impression. But they're always looking for these, like, I don't know. I'm not explaining it very well, so I'll have to tune back in and see if I can pinpoint something they say that's in line with what I'm talking about. Treat it like a royal coronation, yeah.
And it's like it has to, that fever has to break. But I have to tell you, I think it begins, this idea that Joe Biden is always going to be expected to go 90% of the way, which maybe he will, but he shouldn't, when we haven't seen some of these folks go 40% of the way.
And by the way, there's an impeachment trial, perhaps days away. On top of
there's more of this left than I thought.
And it may create more of a divide, but it's going to be a divide inside.
I don't really drink very often, so
today, I think we're seeing a picture of sort of. There's
I already have a slight
right now.
buzz
The
on.
question's going to be: Are they going to survive as one and figure out how to become one again, or are you going to see Trump splinter off into one direction and sort of the pro-democracy Republican?
But yeah, interesting. Speaking of the media optics, I don't know how many of you saw Trump's departure earlier, but that was interesting, especially when they show up to the rally. Just like the juxtaposition, he ends his speech by telling everybody to have a good, have a nice life, and then YMCA starts playing, and then he starts going on the airplane and he starts clapping along to YMCA. So like I understand that they're like, the solemnity of this moment. They have drunken from the royal chalice and been anointed by the Pope, and all the stuff from these media talking heads. But at the same time, right, like that's certainly more dignified than telling everybody to have a nice life and then walking away to YMCA, right? Oh, they go into a commercial break. The more I hear stuff like this, I wonder who makes this stock music. I mean, there gotta be a lot of people, but like you go to music school, you go to some
a democracy built on free and fair elections, where the majority, not the mob, rules.
We are earnestly stating cliches.
No act of insurrection or domestic terror. No desperate despot.
We will bring America together with
All
truisms.
that we stand for, and all we hold dear.
Make no mistake.
Yeah, I mean, all the people are like, oh, the lamestream media. I could go on a rant about the fact that I don't think the media typically doesn't outright lie, but I get why the people don't like the mainstream media. I mean, some of them, obviously, they're not telling me what I want to hear. They must be liars. I don't agree with those people, but like the people who find this stuff all kind of insufferable and patronizing, I totally feel you, okay? Anyway, yeah, I gotta wonder about the people who, they spend years of their life going to a prestigious music school, and then they're like, all right, how do I play, soft piano sounds in order to sell stock music to MSNBC commercials? Is this MSNBC or just, this is just NBC? It's a scene celebrating itself, yeah.
Welcome back to our coverage of the inauguration of President Biden. Chief White House correspondent Kristen Welker joining me now. Kristen, we're an hour into this new.
But is Biden anything more than a career politician?
President Biden's speech is that it was a real call.
Wait, what? I don't even understand the nature of that question.
In the poetic, symbolic sense, but in sending a message to the American people that, yes, he is confronting multiple crises at once, but he essentially said if we are going to be able to address these crises, we have to do it together. And I thought that was really notable. The other thing about this event that really hit me, the fact that Biden has talked about his promise that his administration is going to be a reflection of America, that America will be able to see itself in his administration.
It's interesting, the juxtaposition. Okay, let's go back to this, where it's just like they're just showing raw footage. I'm actually surprised. Maybe does PBS have a different stream going on? Because I'm interested to know, like, where's Judy Woodruff talking about stuff? Special. Oh, direct. Okay, it must be clicked on the direct feed.
Some of them, they are sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night.
Yeah, the PBS NewsHour, you know, like I said, they're my preferred news channel because they're you know, they're very even-handed, and it lacks most of the sort of insufferable stuff that you get with a lot of the other networks.
But as Joe Biden said, there's a lot of work to be done ahead. Judy?
So well put, Amna, and thank you so much for reminding us about those National Guard service members who, as you say, they come from all over the country. For many of them, this may well be their first trip and is their first trip to Washington, and to come here under these circumstances. But as you say, to be working around the clock, all in the service of the country to keep it safe on this most sacred of days when we transfer power from one.
What is that stadium in the background?
We owe them an enormous debt of gratitude.
Is that what's the name of the is that where the Redskins play, or is that the baseball stadium?
At state capitals around the country, our William Brangham has been keeping a close eye on what is going on around the country. William, what have you been?
It's been a couple years since I've been to DC, but
actually mostly been good news. I mean,
I don't think I ever saw that stadium.
During the inauguration and the run-up to
Turn up the volume on TV. Done.
All the sources that we've been in touch with have indicated that it's been a very peaceful day. We've been checking in at the capitals on the West Coast, in Washington State, in Oregon, in the Midwest, in Michigan, in Minnesota, Texas, Georgia, New Jersey, New York, and here in D.C., as Amna has been reporting. It has been a largely peaceful day. There's been a smattering of people that have turned out for protests, but mostly they are vastly outnumbered by police and by press there to cover it. Remember, last week after the events on the Capitol, the FBI sent a memo to all 50 states saying that they should be on the lookout for armed protests both this past weekend and possibly today. And thus far, both here and in Washington, here and elsewhere in the country, none of those have really come to be. And so that is just straight up good news.
Boy, it is very much good news, William, and you're right. I mean, we all had that terrible warning in the attack on the Capitol 2 weeks ago today, but beyond that, put on guard. The military was put on guard, our National Guard, our state capitals, certainly Washington. Everyone has been on the edge of their seat, literally, and worried about what would happen today. Of course, we will continue to worry. People will continue to be vigilant, as we must be, because these threats are not going to go away just because the inauguration is behind us. So for a moment, we want to get out of these secure areas.
It almost looks like a funeral procession.
And go to our Nick Schifrin. He's been out on the streets of Washington, D.C. to see
like all the cars lined up. Those almost look like hearses.
Nick, tell us what you've been running into.
Well, Judy, we've been running into no protesters. We've been running into only journalists and security, and that is as designed. The success of the security that Amna was talking about, that William is talking about, what defense officials tell me, it is deterrence. It's deterrence that you can see behind me, 10-foot-high walls, behind which is the red zone, behind which is 25,000 National Guard troops. Nobody can simply get anywhere near there. And it is what the military says that it tries to do best, use itself so that there's no problem.
Oh, so it's the baseball team?
Defense
okay.
Officials are saying that they've had success in doing that. Part of the restrictions, Judy, as we've been talking about, are unprecedented closures, not only of the mall where Amna is, which is just, by the way, just a couple blocks from here, but also bridges and roads and protests. Just a few blocks from here that way is what they're calling a free speech zone. It's kind of ironic in Washington, D.C. on inauguration, there need to be a free speech zone, but that is the one place that protesters are allowed to protest. Here's the thing, it is behind some security checks, and we went there just a few minutes ago, and it was completely empty. And again, it's that idea that the military, the city, wanted to show that deterrence in order to keep people away, but it's also kept any kind of protesters who obviously still have the First Amendment today away as well, and First Amendment scholars do believe that needs to go away, that this security does need to go away relatively quickly so that people's First Amendment isn't restricted. But bottom line, Judy, as you heard President Biden say, this uncivil war must end. You're seeing a couple of examples of that just around me. I see people beginning to gather, a couple beers being drunk. There's a guy playing guitar to my left, somebody selling sweaters. So a couple of signs here of normalcy. But as you say, the vigilance is still up, that deterrence is still up throughout the rest of the day as these events continue.
Tiptoeing into normality, maybe with a beer or something that seems semi-normal on this day we've all been waiting for and worried about. And Nick, I'm so glad you're pointing out that the military and others in charge of intelligence and other officials who have to watch and worry over this know that the threat doesn't end as of today. It will continue. Their work will continue way beyond January the 20th of 2021. I want to bring into the conversation someone who has known our new vice president for a long time.
I'm going to go back to
she is
the live stream, just the unedited. Let's see. Let's catch up to where it was. So, yeah. Sorry, I didn't realize that it was soccer, right? It still amazes me that that's a thing in America, because I don't really hear of it often. I don't pay much attention to sports, but at least some knowledge of football, baseball, other sports filters into my awareness from time to time. I don't really see many people wearing soccer jerseys or talking about the professional league in the United States. It's not really well known, or it doesn't seem like that. So I'm interested in what kind of money it makes. Apparently, it can afford a stadium in D.C. But yeah, I don't. It still amazes me that that's like a thing. Oh, somebody's like talking in the background. Why do if we don't have a planned economy, why do hedge funds base their investment strategy on Fed policies? Something that wasn't the norm just 13 years ago. My understanding of a planned economy is from countries like the Soviet Union, where the government controlled industry completely. And they said, all right, toilet paper factory, you are going to make, 100 million rolls of toilet paper this year. And, car factory, you are going to make X number of cars this year. And, the commissars decided how much of what was made. That's what a planned economy is. To say that, why do people make investments based on interest rates? Like, that seems to have nothing. I mean, you're talking about two unrelated things. That's not planning an economy. I mean, it's an attempt to influence the economy. But if there was no central reserve bank, and they were just, private banks with whatever their interest loans, deciding their interest loans however they decide them, wouldn't people make investments based on whatever interest rates there were, shopping around whatever interest rates they could get? That would be a factor, like interest rates would be a factor in any kind of borrowing and lending in pretty much any scenario in which you have investment banks and loans and that sort of thing. And that seems to have almost nothing to do with what a planned economy is, unless you're just speaking in the most broad possible terms of, we're going to generally stimulate, it's taking caffeine or something like that, like it's a stimulant, right? And when you get up in the morning and you're like, oh God, I'm so groggy, I need a cup of coffee. Like, you're enacting a plan to stimulate your nervous system with caffeine by ingesting coffee, but that's not the same as, like... Do I even know how money is created? I think it would take a very smart person to anyway. Taking away price discovery from the market, artificial interest rates, I mean, you're using a term planned. Again, I'm sorry, you're still using the term planned economy, which would generally be understood as something very specific, or to mean something much more general. I get what you're driving at. That government policy helps shape the broader economy, but that doesn't really sound like a plan. That sounds like something, like one system responding to inputs from another system. I'm off here. Okay, so I like you, man, but you're off here. Like, I think we just have two completely different understandings of what terms like planned economy means. Or, what I think is that these things like, how to even begin with this? My understanding, again, I'm not an economist, is that things like the sorts of policies like adjusting interest rates, these were created because the unfettered capitalism went through booms and bust cycles that they were attempting to mitigate. Like, they're attempting to avoid. They are trying to, in a general sense, steer the economy to avoid certain well-established pitfalls. So even if you may think that we'd be better off, it's not without rhyme and reason that the Fed adjusts interest rates. It's not part of some Machiavellian scheme to drive us all towards serfdom. They're trying to they at least in their own mind are trying to optimize certain parameters of the economy. Artificial rates and printings of money cause big booms and busts. Well, there were booms and busts before what you're talking about, though. It's padding the pockets of the wealthy with good intention. Okay, now we are in agreement. Again, my personal belief is that for at least the last 40 years, that most of our economic policies have favored big business and Wall Street in the belief that this would somehow trickle down, and it doesn't. And there's all kinds of shenanigans that go on. Closer to agreement, I mean, maybe in an economic system we'd be, in terms of things about economic policies, we might be closer to agreement. But we started out this discussion, Gerbs, with you, in my opinion, doomsaying, and again, it goes back to the fact that you have people like yourself who are saying the sky is going to fall and Biden's going to crater the economy, and then you have the people opposite you saying that he's a neoliberal shill who would never implement, radical economic policies, right? Trickle down isn't an economic theory. It's like the term neoliberal. Yeah, I mean, I think that when I first heard the term neoliberal, I heard it in the context of a reaction of like Bill Clinton and New Labor to the right-wing counter-revolution of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. But then I started hearing it, neoliberalism applied to Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and I'm like, wait a minute, I thought they were the right-wing counter-revolution to like the 60s and the New Deal and the Great Society. And then it's just like basically, I kind of make I don't take the term entirely seriously. I should state that outright, because it's just used to describe the economic policies of the last 40 years by both sides, with no meaningful distinction between them. And that to me is where it starts to lose coherence as a meaningful descriptor, when it's just this blanket term to describe the last 40 years of economic policy and ideology. It's But, okay, so Gerbs, I'm interested in what do you see as the solutions to this? Are you just like, we need some version of radical free markets, or a completely different monetary and tax strategy, or what policies do you think would actually reverse what you're talking about and be good for the majority of Americans rather than a narrow few? And I understand that you're at work and you can't write a novel. I did read those comments, but yeah, I'm kind of going back and forth between just these, the unfiltered direct feed of a bunch of people standing around in a government building, and going back to the streams where it's like, pompous talking heads. Let me tell you about in 1852, President Grover Jefferson.
Senator Lisa Murkowski says it was well done and what the country needed. Senator Mitt Romney, who has never been shy to criticize President Biden's predecessor, said it was powerful and given with conviction. So those are stamps of approval from people who will be critical in creating some kind of momentum for President Biden in the Senate. And that is because the key focus now is not on necessarily the extreme sort of ends of either party, right? Those senators who are considered potentially more conservative on the far right. It is that group in the middle that includes, for example, Senator
Okay, so you say we need sound money, we need real interest rates, and the freedom to open businesses without red tape impediment. Problem being, we're so far gone that we have to go through years of difficult times, which nobody wants. The longer we kick the can down the road, the worse it will be. Our financial and monetary policy is like heroin for a heroin addict. The longer we take the drug, the worse it will be to get off of it. Well, I think that's at least an interesting perspective, because I think you struck on one very critical point, is that there's not the incentive structure to change, because as long as you can flood a donor class, a political donor class with money, you can create a reciprocal relationship between wealthy individuals and corporations, policies that further their wealth, which they cycle some of that back into political campaigns of people who will recapitulate the policies, and then changing to something that would require anything to be, everything has to go up, up, up. Not only people talk about, corporations, they just want profit, 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 always ever greater profit. But at the same time, when you're a politician, especially if you're a president, you don't want to be the person that says, okay, we're going to have to go through a painful detox, a painful economic detox. If you went into office and said, okay, we're going to implement these policies to get things back on a surer footing, but it'll be good in the long run, like kicking heroin. No, you would be a one-term president, because the fact that the economy did not grow while you were in office would be used to crucify you. You'd just be you'd be run out of town on a rail, because there's this constant the economy, even if it isn't, even if it is just numbers in stock portfolios based on inflated fiat currency, that there's enough that can be that can be linked in the minds of people who are actually suffering enough to say, oh, this president's doing a terrible job on the economy, and they kick you out on your ass. So unless your drastic changes to the monetary system it could work their way through the system in your 4-year one term as president, assuming that you have the political backing to implement those things. If it can't, if it's a longer term project, then good luck sustaining that in a political system where that has a 2, 4, and 6 year turnover period of politicians. Now they're cutting back to this stream. Okay.
For it, as somebody whose job once was to protect this country vis-a-vis the world, as defense secretary and CIA director, why do you think that was an important message to send?
It's an important message that America is back as a world leader, and I think that is particularly important. These last 4 years have been chaotic. We've gradually withdrawn from the world to an America First approach. We undermined alliances. We empowered adversaries. And I think there's a tremendous amount of distrust about America. And after the siege of the Capitol, it also sent a message of whether or not our democracy was sound. I think what President Biden was trying to do was to send a new message to the world, that America is back, that we will be a world leader, that we will work with our alliances, that we will recognize who our adversaries are, and that we will do everything we can to try to confront the dangerous threats that exist in the world today.
Secretary Panetta, Lester Holt here. Talk about the foreign challenges, Iran and China and North Korea. When and how would you expect them to test a new president?
Well, that's the challenge that obviously will concern the president and his cabinet as to when is he going to suddenly confront that crisis abroad. And we don't know the answer to that, but we do know that in these last few years, I think things have rapidly deteriorated around the world. Iran is in a much more difficult situation. They're enriching nuclear fuel, coming closer to the possibility of developing a nuclear weapon. North Korea is continuing to develop nuclear weapons. We're in a whole...
So the foreign policy talk about Trump and Biden, this is something that I've thought at least a little bit about, because it seems to me that the current world order was largely constructed after World War II. This is my understanding. And in the ashes of World War II, with America standing, triumphant and less damaged than any other country, stronger. It was probably the only country, or one of the only countries, to come out of the war stronger than it came in, and as a world power in a way that hadn't been before. And that's when we created our system of military bases around the world, of a constant military presence and a very what's the word? Not necessarily large in terms of manpower, but high-tech global military presence. And at the time, there was a rationale because it went hand in hand with what the kids today like to call globalism, where previous empires had started to come to blows based on, restrictive trade policies things like trade policies that made them rivals in the way in which America was like, all right, you guys need to cut it out. We're gonna have this new system, this new trade system of everybody's gonna get along and everyone's gonna trade with each other, or at least the non-communist nations of the world. And we're going to create a sort of new world order, if you will, and globalism, if you will, based on trying to diffuse a lot of the tensions that built up over the colonial world of everybody trying to live in this more imperialistic, nationalistic way. And there were flaws with that, and there were good intentions with that. But 70-something years on, nearly 80 years on, with all the things that have happened and changed drastically in between, I think the average American has sort of reached a point where the logic of that and the logic of the Cold War is fading out of living memory. And with the Trump foreign policy, there was an opportunity to exploit the fact of like, why the hell are we still doing all of this? Like, why is this our posture towards the world? Why are we trying to be world policemen? Why have we gotten into these wars? I mean, that's not to say that his foreign policy was correct in all details, but what I'm getting at was that just the rationale behind why like America's role in the world has crumbled. Like, most people just largely out of ignorance, just they don't get it. Like, why are we doing this? Why have we done this? Why have we done that? And so that left an opening for people like Trump to exploit the disillusionment after things like Iraq, which a lot of I don't remember the exact. I'd have to look up the exact poll numbers, but the Iraq War was quite well supported when it started out. There was a lot of bloodlust after 9/11. A lot of people thought it was going to be a great idea, and they were foaming at the mouth, ready to get into these wars that 5, 6, 7, 8 years later they want to pretend were a terrible idea later on. And a combination of just not understanding the rationale by which the sort of world order that the foreign policy order that was created in the post-war and Cold War periods and is we're still like living with the vestiges of. Most people don't seem to understand the rationale, and most people are disillusioned with recent foreign adventures. And that's basically what's created the opportunity. And I still think a lot of these talking heads, even former secretaries of defense, don't quite get that the American people, like, they don't seem to care anymore. They don't understand. They're not given good reasons. They've developed cynical attitudes based on foreign misadventures, and they're like, can Biden reestablish this idea that most Americans don't seem on board with to begin with? Maybe try and explain why we're doing what we're doing instead of just, oh no, we've upset our allies. Like, in many ways, that is a bad thing, but I feel like it's been a long time since the United States as a people has taken any serious stock of what we're doing in the world and why. And just talking about how we can, go to our allies and be like, we're sorry, just ignore what happened with that guy. I think it's going to take a lot more than that to course correct. Do I think that Biden will take up Obama's extrajudiciary killings, wars, and deportations? Probably not, or not to the same degree, because again, as I was talking about with the monetary policy and how no politician is gonna make America detox from questionable monetary policy. There's also incentives within things like foreign policy, especially, and in 2008, the world of 2008 and the political incentives of that time is just different 12 years on. And I think that Biden can actually take advantage of the fact that of what I was just talking about, where Trump exposed the apathy towards a lot of American, on behalf of the American public, of a lot of American foreign policy. Of course, people are worried about such a country getting nuclear missiles and that sort of thing. But I don't think that he will face the same sort of pressures and incentives to follow a more violent path. Like I don't think that the political pressures and or incentives are there to behave in the same way. And honestly, that's the way that I tend to view a lot of the way that presidents behave, because I think that when you reach that echelon of power and you are suddenly the commander in chief of the military, that all of your decisions, a lot of people on the left or the right or wherever, like average person, they make relatively black and white decisions, like murdering civilians in a drone strike is wrong. This is something you don't do. But when you reach the upper echelons of power, I think that if the decisions don't become shades of gray, that you at least have internalized ways of thinking that make them seem like they're shades of gray. And so I don't think it's entirely just like, oh, we have warmongering, hateful people that just want to, kill people in drone strikes or whatever. But they're, depending on the political and cultural pressures at the time that they face, they may be more or less aggressive. I think that in anything, Biden is probably going to be face more pressure to crack down on domestic terror groups, or I don't know if they're going to officially call it a war on domestic terror, because there's no specific domestic terror law, and that's just sort of a colloquial term. But who knows? Well, someone will fill up that vacuum if America withdraws its presence. I'm not saying this is a defense of our foreign policy, but I really don't see a world where China is leading the way. You know what? I'm going to be brutally honest here. I'm inclined to agree. Again, maybe I personally just absorbed too much of the morally gray way of thinking that politicians have. So think twice before you vote for me for president, for sure. But there was a war between, what was it, Armenia and, I'm going to seem like a stupid American for not remembering their neighboring country. But it was a relatively, by the standards of wars, a sort of a dispute between neighbors, and Russia it was in their backyard, so you would think that they would try and decide on it either way. But of course, you have the other regional powers, Turkey, America, Russia. They're all kind of trying to double deal with both sides. So it took maybe longer than it should have to resolve this situation. But I think there's this assumption that I don't agree with, that a lot of leftists seem to have, that if America withdraws from the world, they talk about the American empire and all the bases that America has. But I feel if America withdrew from the world, it would not be this world of harmony. I don't know, probably a lot of you have seen The Simpsons, and you remember this scene where Lionel Hutz is like, can you imagine a world without lawyers? And it's like all these people frolicking together in a field with a rainbow, and the sun is shining, and then he shudders like, ugh. That seems to be like, it seems there are a lot of leftists that, if the American empire would just get rid of all of its overseas military bases and drastically scale back its military, that peace and harmony would reign throughout the world. And I don't believe that for a second. I mean, at a bare minimum, we would see more minor skirmishes. We would see more small-scale wars between neighboring countries, and we would see actors like Russia and China trying to being aggressive towards their neighbors, as they do anyway, to the degree that they can get away with now. But they would be much more aggressive, unrestrained, and I'm not convinced that the American military hegemonic empire is genuinely a net negative for the world. I'm not convinced of that by any stretch of the imagination. Azerbaijan. See, you know what? I did think of that in my head, but I wasn't sure. Do any of you remember the first Splinter Cell game? Wasn't it Azerbaijan in that he goes to in the first Splinter Cell game? More NBC News. Let's see. How long have I been streaming for now? Almost 2 hours. Wow. What's going on? Pause this. Back to this.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, as you say, Congresswoman, are smiling from ear to ear because of what you say about the new Vice President. Knowing her as you do, and as you say, you got to know each other when you were both sworn in to Congress. What do you think she brings?
Yeah, it's simple. Would you rather live in China, Russia, or America? And call me a cornball, white patriotic American, but I genuinely believe that there are a lot of leftists who basically look at the United States and cherry pick the worst aspects of its history, the worst aspects of its present, and use that to define America in the starkest possible terms. And it's like they have no appreciation for the upsides of America. To the point where it's like it almost makes me want to go super patriot on them. Obviously, there are people on the opposite side who just think America does no wrong, and those people are equally mistaken. But just trying to find someone with a clear, clear-eyed and balanced view of the United States and its history and role in the world, and the significance of its systems of government and its institutions in terms of not only the current world, although I think it's over time it's become less significant as there have been other democracies have developed, but in terms of world history in general, a lot of people just have this a lot of leftists particularly just have this stark view of America as one torrent of blood, and it's like, yeah, but no greater to the extent of the rest of human history is. Like, what do you expect from a bunch of talking primates? Like, this kind of, it may not be the greatest country on earth, but you'd be hard pressed to find anything much better than this now or ever in the past. In Europe, we don't have that. No European country is free from blood. What I find interesting about a lot of people on the, especially on the far left, is they hold up countries like Scandinavia and other European countries because they have they have healthcare systems and they have education. But at the same time, it's like they grade America based on the history from 1492 onwards is how they construct their idea of what America is, and they judge Western Europe from like 1955 onwards. It's not even. Could it be free markets and individual? What do you think allowed us to become great so quickly? Could it be free markets and individual liberty? That's an interesting question because, for one thing, government investment in things like infrastructure has played a much bigger role in the development of the country than a lot of people who say sentences like what you, or pose questions like what you just asked, would like to admit. The government role in infrastructure is a major part of what has been is part of America's success. Also, let's be brutally honest here. Oh God, now I'm going to sound like one of those leftists I was just talking about. The early, like, is it personal liberty? Well, let's see. In colonial America, you had a slave economy, and that slave economy was in a reciprocal relationship with a more industrialized economy in the North. So it doesn't seem, when one of the economic pillars of your economy is slavery, then not so much. And then slavery is abolished, but then cheap labor was a major thing, and give the ability to expand westward based on land confiscated from other people through violence. And you basically have the government come in, you have land speculators come in, and then it's like, hey, let's give away a bunch of land to homesteaders. The ability to exploit things like cheap labor, even after slavery was exploited, you have these waves of immigration that just provide cheap labor fodder, and the ramping up of the Industrial Revolution, and often then it's less about. I mean, you can make arguments about whether or not it's the economic system or whether or not it's the technological developments. You can also point to the vast natural resources that were there to be exploited. To say that it's the free enterprise system and individual liberty. Again, not to sound like a leftist, but when I look at American history, that's just not what I see. Like, where is this? Like, what decade are you talking about? The Gilded Age? Like the antebellum South? Like, where are these conditions that you're talking about? Because that doesn't seem an honest representation of like the American economy and like the development of the American economy. You, as I said, you've had all sorts of things that have gone into building it: vast resources, exploitation of slave labor, exploitation of cheap labor, technological breakthroughs. Free land that allowed for expansion of the country, government investment in infrastructure, all sorts of things. It's never been this like, I'm a pioneer, Mr. Pioneer Homesteader. I'm industrious and I go and I build my farm and that makes America strong. It's like it's never quite been like what you're describing. Let's see. Government is inefficient. The infrastructure during the Great Depression slowed down recovery. I think you're kind of cherry picking. Every day, every time I drive on a government-built interstate from the Eisenhower interstate system, I see Walmart trucks. I see Amazon trucks. It is the arteries. It is the literal arteries of our economy, and it's easy to underestimate how vital it is in how crucial it is to our system. One time, just not to go on a complete side tangent, but one time my grandfather was telling me about when they first built Interstate 80, going from, I think it's Interstate 80, going from like, the West Coast to the East Coast. And they had gone out to, I think, San Francisco for one of my uncle's weddings. And then they got word that my grandmother's father, my great-grandfather, had died, and he lived in Rhode Island. So they had to drive back from, the West Coast to the East Coast. And on the way there, they did not take interstates, and it took days and days. And then being able to take Interstate 80 back to the East Coast, that he said it was just like so much faster. They were able to travel so much faster on the interstate. And you see that even things like the the Transcontinental Railroad. There's this story that when they were building the Transcontinental Railroad, that you had people descending on Congress. You had lobbyists descending on Congress to see how much they could jack up the rate that we're getting, because the government gave them the land, they gave them the money to build it, and it's like it's hailed this as some benefit of private enterprise. So you look at the Tennessee Valley. I mean, if you go, this is something I have, I've seen up close personally, having been to some of these places, is that, and you can go back and see the comparisons of what places like the Tennessee Valley were like before the Tennessee Valley Authority came in and did things like rural electrification. They were backwaters. And I'm not saying some of these places are still, economically marginal, but I mean, it's like you're talking about people living in shacks. And there would have been no, it's difficult to imagine massive infrastructure projects like rural electrification, like the building of, like what TVA did, and building of things like the Hoover Dam without something like a force like the government stepping in. I mean, and you can go back even further than that to the Erie Canal. I'm not saying that the government should be 100% responsible for these things, or that it's always this economic panacea. But government, going back to the beginning, has been involved in things like canals, highways, railroads, and those things are vital to the economy and the expansion of the economy. And to just pretend that it's, private industry and I don't know. It seems like you're just trying to do everything to ignore what's kind of obvious, that the government not all bad. Like that's clearly oversimplifying. Let's see. You see the economy through the lens of big business. I mean, but okay. I mean, okay. Before you were saying, well, let me just scroll back over. Okay, so what do you think allowed us to become so great so quickly? And so then I describe like these major achievements in the American economy, and then you tell me that I see everything through the lens of big business. Like, pick one. Oh my God. Oh my God, the roads. What's next? The post office? And I just can't. What's next from you? A description of how, if we just had, for-profit private courts, that would be a much better system of justice than our current justice system. We don't need a monopoly on violence from the state. We need a free market on violence. You know what? I'll tell you what. The moment we have a free market on violence, well, then I'll see. I'm willing to invest. I see if I can get somebody to kill you for $20. Now, understand that's a joke, but at the same time, I mean, why not? If there's a free market of violence, I can, I'm sure there will be somebody desperate enough, right? Like, anyway, I'm going off on a dumb tangent, but still, I don't think the government is the solution to every problem. But to point out that it has a relationship to the economy in a positive way in terms of like infrastructure, that should be relatively uncontroversial. But there are some people who are just. What do you think America would be like had we left it entirely to private investment to build canals and roads and railroads and dams and all of these other things? To me, it's again these radical, the far right economic ideas. They always seem to assume like more or less this, the world as we know it now, but better because more business, freer business. I think that you'd have to like fundamentally reimagine the way, like society as we know it. If you want to talk about these like radical changes. The free market leads to efficiency, which leads to cheaper prices, which leads to more wealth. Which leads to more opportunity. There's a certain. This is something that I have to. I don't want to get into after I've drunk a bottle of champagne and I'm trying to half pay attention to a live stream and cover 5 different topics at once. But I think there's a kind of, if not circularity to the idea of economic efficiency, then there's a certain amount of defining the parameters in like there's a defining of parameters of what constitutes things like efficiency, and a lot of the concepts of the sort of perks of capitalism that you're talking about. That's often kind of self-serving, and that's when you start to unpack those things, you realize like, hey, that's kind of why things don't pan out better for the majority of people. Let's see. All right, let me turn back to what's going on.
And there's been a cancerous growth on this democracy.
Oh, this is PBS, so this is people talking. Oh, wait, hold on. That's not even... Okay.
The gift presentations. Tell us your thoughts on this day.
Well, like Sean, my first thought is Sean with a beard, which was quite interesting. The speech, which I found very impressive, very matter-of-fact and direct, and you get a sense of what Joe Biden is like from the speech. He was outlining all of the problems, the difficulties ahead. It wasn't a speech that had a lot of sort of lofty rhetoric to it. I did like the winter of peril and significant possibility, which basically harkens back to the issue of dealing with COVID and all that has to be done at this particular point. I was also struck by the religiosity of the speech. I mean, American politicians know that religion is important to lots of Americans, and so invoke it very often in speeches. But I got the real sense here that he means it, that this is a part of his philosophy of life, and that came through very, very clearly as well. The part that you mentioned at the end with McCarthy and what a difference a couple of weeks make. Wednesday has been doing yeoman service here over the past couple of weeks. Just an amazing contrast, but this is very nice, and it's good to have the symbolism of everyone coming together. But the truth of the matter is there's a lot to be done. As Sean said, accountability has to be a part of this notion of unity, of coming together, of people recognizing what happened, the enormity of what happened, just thinking of what the Capitol looked like a couple of weeks ago and where we are today. This placidness can't hide the fact that there's a lot roiling in the American public at this point, and President Biden and Vice President Harris are going to have to deal with this. That's the reality.
No question, Professor Annette Gordon-Reed. This is kind of a big question, but did President Biden's speech meet the moment in your view?
I think it did. And it met the moment by being who he is, by being truthful, by being, as I said, matter of fact and very, very direct. Not a lot of platitudes, but more about what he has to do and trying to convince people that he is going to give his soul. His soul is in this, he says, to try to deal with the problems that we're facing. So I think it was exactly what we needed at this particular moment. Been through a lot in the past couple of weeks, in the last 4 years, but certainly momentous events in the last couple of weeks. And this was something to kind of cool things down and to make us think about the fact that we have a raging pandemic um, in the country, a virus that doesn't care about whether you're a Republican or Democrat. It doesn't care about, I'm in New Hampshire. The virus doesn't say I'm not going into Massachusetts. This is something that's affecting all of us, and there has to be a national effort. And he kept coming back to that, and I think that was very, very important and is a signal about what this administration is going to be like. He wants to do things, and that's important.
Sean, well, Lance, you mentioned Lincoln's two inaugural addresses in your remarks a few minutes
Am I
ago.
wrong in thinking that PBS just seems so much less full of itself than the rest of the news? Yeah. So I've been kind of monitoring the conversation going on in the chat about the economy, and I feel like I want to respond to a lot of it, but at the same time, it's like I get a bit of a buzz going. I'm half paying attention to the chat, half paying attention to what's going on in the on the screen. But I find it strange that I don't want to entirely dismiss what's being said about the efficiency of things like markets. I do understand those arguments, and I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing them out of hand or I see no value in them, and I particularly do not want to be lectured to like I've never heard these ideas before, like, let me tell you about efficiency and prices and that sort of thing, because oftentimes when you object to something, so the pushback you get is they treat you like you've never even heard the ideas before. But at the same time, again, a lot of the problems that I have with some of these things is like the metrics that people use to measure what is success, what is economic efficiency. I'm trying to think of the example. What was it in New York City? They have Shakespeare in the Park, and the tickets are supposed to be free, but rich people will pay people to stand in line for them. And there are economists will say, well, this is economic efficiency because it goes to who wants it the most. But then when who wants it the most becomes nearly synonymous with who can afford it, then something's fundamentally broken in the idea of efficiency. It's not quite circular the way economic efficiency is defined, but the phrase that keeps coming to mind is like self-referencing, or it's at the very least defined in a way that it isn't successful in the way that it would want to suggest that it's successful. It means essentially that some people succeed, certain positive things happen, but it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily lead to the sorts of results that people would expect. And I know I'm not being clear enough in what I'm saying here because I haven't really sat down and tried to articulate it. I'm just going off the cuff here. But it seems to me that we live in a society, we live in a world in which creating products, the resources and product creation is not the problem. We live in a world of artificial scarcity and also artificial inequality. And I don't know, I have a difficulty looking at the world as it is, of artificial scarcity, artificial inequality, and going, yup, there's a perfectly functioning system. Now I get it. I already know that it's like, well, let me tell you how the government creates. Like, it's not like, can you let go of the idea that it's all the government regulation or monetary policy? That maybe the problem is in, like, maybe these assumptions about, the miraculous invisible hand of the market are at least part of what's wrong. Like, at least consider that idea. At least consider the idea that, like, it has to do with who to sound like a Marxist here, who owns the means of production, with the idea of capital as the private ownership of the means of production, and how money is intentionally diverted upwards, how, everything is always striving for growth. Yes, there's efficiency, but there's also this constant pressure for growth rather than meeting need. there's obvious ways in which the system just fails. It has fundamentally fails tens of millions of people, and to look at that and be like, oh, it's all the government, or it's all this, or it's all that, because according to this theory of perfect markets, well, we don't live in a world of perfect markets, and we're never going to live in a world of perfect markets. And when you have a system where people are trying to maximize their self-interests, then of course they're going to create crony capitalism where they game the system and create regulatory capture. And of course, when you have a system of political incentives that creates the sort of monetary policies that we have now, that you're going to get what you're going to get. Oh, what do we got? Revolutionary Patriot dudes.
Power movement in America also joining us.
I feel like I keep waiting for some other defining event, like him showing up at the White House or something, but it seems like mostly a bunch of people standing around, talking heads.
Because there hasn't been a disruption, because there hasn't been another move towards something like what we saw 2 weeks ago at the Capitol. How much work does it take to keep a day like today safe?
We got redcoats and colonial Continental Army. Are they going to stage a mock battle? That'd be funny. They start pretend shooting each other right in front of the president.
Seen so far a peaceful day in Washington. There are other reasons I think that it's been peaceful that maybe we can talk a little bit about, including the fact that, after the insurrection 2 weeks ago, there have just been a number on a daily basis of
Okay, Gerbs, you say, and you want bigger government to create artificial fairness. Not really. And the truth is, I'm somewhat cynical about a lot of this stuff, or cynical is the right word, pessimistic, whatever you want to say, in that I don't think there are easy answers, and that it's almost as if we need to be willing at least to look at things from completely different perspectives, because even though I may not subscribe to the magic invisible hand will solve all our problems, sort of. I'm sorry if I'm, mocking and stereotyping your view, but like the magic hand of the market will solve all our problems view. I at least appreciate the attempt to look at things from a radically different perspective, and just the willingness to say, yeah, there is something profoundly wrong with this situation, because there's a lot of people who essentially just want to maintain a status quo because they're incapable of thinking outside of narrow parameters of rearranging the deck chairs. The Dems are almost the Republicans of the 70s. Yeah, I mean, Nixon created the EPA and had a bunch of other what would be considered fairly policies that, Nixon would probably be considered a radical leftist if he were president today. And he also would have done a better job than Donald Trump. I mean, there's a lot of negative things to say about Richard Nixon, but he wasn't, incompetent and ignorant of the world. Looks like they're getting ready to drive somewhere.
These folks involved 2 weeks ago and ongoing are being reported on.
You know, that's something that I find really hopeful in our current political moment, which is that all of our security apparatus, our law enforcement, at this point now, the President of the United States, along with a growing population of the general public, now understands that white power extremism is the single greatest domestic terror threat to American citizens. This is a huge threat that will continue, I believe, in the weeks and months to come. And I think one very important thing to remember as we're watching this change in administration is that although Trump is no longer president of the United States and seems to be losing command of some
Is he on his
movement
phone?
as it reformulates itself, as activists recalibrate to the new context, this momentum doesn't just disappear with him. This was never a groundswell that was in command of President Trump. This has always been a opportunistic movement that's been with us since the 1980s and that's interested in fomenting violence however it can. So a change in context doesn't mean a change in activity. It just means that we need to recalibrate what we're looking for as people reshape what they're doing.
And Kathleen Belew, if President Trump is losing command, as you put it, of this movement, who is assuming command? To whom do they look for leadership now?
So this movement has been organized around a strategy called leaderless resistance since the early 1980s. Now that is familiar to most of us now as simply cell-style terrorism. The idea is that one or a few actors can work in loosely coordinated cells that are very difficult to connect together with evidence that can stand up in a prosecution in court or can sort of show us how these groups are interconnected. Now, this extremist groundswell today has a lot of different moving parts, and in some ways, it's
They're like a
very
wiki
different
cult.
than anything
One
we've
of
seen
the
in the
internet's
past,
many
because
examples of a
what
wiki
we
cult.
see is targeted radicalization campaigns online that are reaching people through QAnon and reaching people in kind of the stop the steal garden variety Trump MAGA space and pulling them towards these much more violent and radical ideas around accelerationism, around preparing for race war, around Klan and neo-Nazi belief systems, and around kind of boogaloo culture. Now, that mix of forces is new, but I think history can show us a lot about what has happened in the past when these activists have felt that political roads were closing and have then turned to acts of mass violence against American citizens.
Mary McCord, as we watch the limousine carrying President Biden, we have to get used to saying that, President Biden, and another limousine carrying Vice President Harris. How will the
are they just
security apparatus
getting ready
in the
to go to the
United
White
States
House?
change under this new president? How will it be reconfigured, refocused, do you think?
Well, I think if we're talking specifically about the approach to domestic extremism, I think we will see very early on, in fact, we heard some of it in the speech today, the inaugural speech. We will hear early on a commitment to combating domestic extremism. We already know the FBI has put resources toward this. As indicated earlier, Director Wray has been clear that the white supremacist threat is the greatest threat of terrorism in the homeland right now. And so I think the FBI has put those resources toward it. But what we haven't heard for the last 4 years is any leadership above that, really talking about the seriousness and significance of this threat. That's really going to change. I don't think we're going to see, new types of intelligence authorities or anything. I mean, we're talking about domestic threats here. They have connections overseas, international connections. The white power movement doesn't end at the borders of the United States, but we're really talking a lot about an internal problem. And so all of the normal resources that investigators have under criminal authorities are the kinds of things that will be used to try to combat this threat, to engage in a strategy of prevention as opposed through proactive types of investigations, as opposed to prosecution after the fact. We don't want to be prosecuting things like the El Paso shooting after they have occurred. We want to be thwarting those types of plans before they occur, like the thwarting of the Michigan plot this summer, the plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. That's the kind of proactive things that I think we'll see. But I also think we need to see a really reaching out to all of the tools available across not only the federal government, but states and local governments, and even the tech sector and the activist sector. What are the levers, what are the tools that each have to address this threat from a very holistic approach?
Mary McCord, and as we watch the motorcade with President Biden and Vice President Harris leaving the Capitol, I want to just quickly come back to you, Matthew Doherty, as we think about who do we have to thank for the fact that everything went smoothly today. We didn't have a scare at anything on the level of what we saw 2 weeks ago. Who are the individuals we need to be thanking?
All right, maybe we've had enough level-headedness now. Let's go here with the talking heads on
Insurrection or domestic terror.
No death. Fast forward.
Arlington National Cemetery, where the president, along with the other living former.
Wonder about the interns that they get to make all these graphics.
Tomb of the unknown.
Oh, that's where they're going. Okay.
Keep our eyes on that motorcade as it makes its way across Washington and over the river to Arlington National Cemetery. I want to bring in Chuck Todd and Andrea Mitchell, our two Washington.
It's funny because before I started this stream, I was watching a YouTube episode on YouTube of, I think it's called what is the? It's called like Lost something. Let me look at my history thing. What is it called?
And in a matter of moments, at the
History. What is this show called? It's going to bug me until I remember, even though it's not that relevant.
It comes into place.
Long Lost Family. It's a show from, I think, it might be on the BBC, but it's a show from the UK. And they had a special episode about doing DNA testing to discover the soldiers, like try and discover family members of the soldiers and identify graves, you know, like identify remains from like World War I, and it was pretty interesting. I wonder if they've tried to do any DNA testing on the unknown soldier at Arlington.
Air Force One, most often when you see it. And in this case, this is the first time in the nuclear age where the nuclear football was not passed from one president's military aid to the.
Speaking of the nuclear football, for a long time, some of the codes I think were 000000 or something like that. It was just a bunch of zeros, and of course they changed the codes. But for like a long time, I think it was in the 60s, and I think it was just it might have been just the naval codes, but it was just like a bunch of zeros ended up being the nuclear code, and this became declassified because they wanted to have it. Just, you know, minimal effort in the event of a nuclear war.
It's never happened that we know of. Identifies himself or maybe someday herself to the Pentagon, to the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, and then they take it from there once he or she has identified himself.
By the way, guys, one other little, I guess, historical footnote. It is now a footnote, but about 3 weeks ago, this is just as right after 2 weeks ago, obviously, after the insurrection. And there was a lot of wonders if would Donald Trump finish his term. And Lester, you pointed out that the license plate says 46. But believe it or not, the inaugural committee, the Biden folks, had 47 signage ready to go in the because they thought there was at least a not 0% chance that Mike Pence could have been president for a day or two or some, when all of that speculation proceeded, and just in case they had.
I made this joke on when I was on the Breakfast Club live stream a couple weeks ago, but I said, can you imagine if Mike Pence was president, right? And he has to give his wife a security clearance so we can meet with female world leaders like Angela Merkel. Like when that, to me, I personally find that idea funny.
That area, likely so on his way to the Capitol today, but a reminder of the
Almost as. Again, maybe I'm a little buzzed from the champagne, but I just thought of an even funnier idea: the idea of Angela Merkel trying to hit on Mike Pence.
We've had these gates at different times, right? They've not only put in this secure fencing, they've put razor wire on top of it. I mean, it really does feel like at times that you're at a military base in a foreign country where you're worried about hostilities.
I've been to the Green Zone in Iraq, and it is very similar.
The D.C. Green Zone.
That, you know, it's a no-go land except for...
It's the razor wire that's jarring, I'll just be frank.
You know, you see it also in Kabul and other conflict zones whenever I've been traveling with secretaries of state or with the vice president or with presidents back in the day. But also, Lester, in past inaugurals, I've been on the flatbed truck for the parade. So I'm seeing this for the first time this way, but I'm usually on that flatbed truck
watch you on the flatbed,
with the camera pool, because there's a parade and there are throngs of people and you don't see this fence wire. And then as this time, they're of course not going back to the White House, they're first going to Arlington Cemetery. So they are going.
Was this, you know, live cam thing that they're showing now, was this planned in advance? Like, you know, the government is just lending out this feed to that, or is it a press car that's allowed to follow the motorcade? That seems unlikely.
And there was that grace note, Lester and Savannah.
Do any of you remember Ronald Reagan's funeral and how like choreographed that was? Because that, to me, that was really weird to watch. Just how like pre-staged everything was, right down to the camera shots, like the panning. Like they had a, what's the word? Not a dolly shot, a crane shot of the motorcade at the funeral, at the burial site, and all these things. And there was a certain surrealness to watch because it was also like carefully choreographed, but you also had like the meta commentary of the media pointing out how choreographed it was. And yeah, and I don't think it was the same year, but it was kind of around that same time period that the Pope died. I think there was maybe roughly a year apart, John Paul. And, you know, they're showing live coverage of, like, them just bringing out his body on a, like, they brought out his body, and there's this, seeing, like, a dead body like that brought out on live television was kind of, another one of those slightly surreal experiences. Like, I remember one time when I was a kid and there was a bombing in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or somewhere like that, and they were showing a live feed, and it took them a few minutes. You know, it was a bombing of a bus, and it took them a few minutes to realize that they were broadcasting the image of the bus driver's burned corpse. You know. Oh, God. We're a country of laws.
Democracy built on free and fair elections, where the majority, not the mob, rules.
Thanking today. See where there will be a wreath laying at the tomb of the unknowns. But there you see a lot of National Guard and others standing guard along this roadway. It looks to me that they are heading into the tunnel. I believe it's a tunnel heading through, or rather heading toward Virginia. So we'll see when they come out at the other end. Yamiche Alcindor at the White House. Yamiche, you've been watching all of this, and you getting a better sense of what President Biden will be doing and is doing today.
That's right. This is a White House that is bustling with anticipation, and already you're seeing.
Have they finished sterilizing the place?
Biden aides coming into the White House and getting to work There are also physical manifestations of the change. We saw just now the Beast, which is the limo that protects the president that he rides in. That license plate has now been changed to 46, of course, for the 46th president of the United States. Inside the White House, they're also changing the furniture. I just also saw a number of
Got a saying, heads up, we've detected copyright audio on your stream. I must have been that damn music, I bet. That melodramatic music.
What is normally done because of the pandemic and because, of course, this White House was a White House that had multiple outbreaks with the predecessor of President Biden. The other thing I want to note is that the President of the United States will be signing 17 executive actions, and there's a statistic that is right now dealing with this country right now, a fact in this country, and that is
Gerbs, have a good day, and workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains.
More likely to be killed by the police than white Americans. Those two statistics, I'm told, really do get at the heart of the challenges for the Biden administration because, of course, first and chief among them will be his priority to the COVID-19 pandemic. He's going to be signing a mask mandate. He's also going to be signing an executive action to form his White House team. The Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, who served with his predecessor, he's now been asked to resign because Biden is going to be having his own team. But he's also, as part of those actions, Judy, he's going to be having a complete government review of equity, asking every single agency to look and see how systemic racism is playing a part in their agency.
Does this chat belong to the stream? Yeah.
Dealing with this pandemic, he's also dealing with the realities of racism in this country. And lastly, Judy,
it seems so detached. Yeah, well, I'm sorry.
Amanda Gorman continues to come to
See, the thing is, once you start talking about politics, you get people who, hurl some extreme point of view, and then it becomes sort of back and forth about it. And next thing you know, you're discussing, monetary policy and economic theory. And look, I'm not one of those doomsayers. It's like, oh my God, Joe Biden's gonna ruin America or whatever. Again, I expect he'll be relatively middle of the road. Even if he wanted to be more radical, I don't think that the Democrats will be able to do that. But so then those it was like a 2-hour chat that just spun off in different directions, talking about the economy and militant labor and the efficiency of markets and which I guess is probably more interesting than watching a bunch of panning shots of the Capitol. But just hone in on bad faith arguers. Yeah. See, I guess I kind of have sometimes I just don't bother. There are other times where it's like, hey, this is something to respond to. But he seemed more like a true believer rather than a bad faith arguer. But maybe not, because it's hard to say, because he smelled like Economics 101. Yeah, definitely. It's hard to say because you hit a wall with certain people, and sooner or later, I understand that people are stubborn and don't want to change their opinions, but sometimes you argue with people, and when I hit a certain kind of wall with people, that's when I judge whether or not I'm just gonna give up and back off. Like I had somebody a few weeks ago when I made a video. It was probably more like a month ago now. I made some sort of video, and one of the previous live streams that I did back in December, I was painting Warhammer minis. So this person latched onto that, and they took that fact and they leveraged it to make all these statements about basically Proud Boys type of stuff. You're not a real man, which, whatever. But anyway, after attempting to talk to this person, even though I arguably shouldn't have given the time of the day, there came a point in the conversation where he's like, oh, a real man, blah, blah, you can't, do things like fix, and I'm like, no, I actually can do things like fix things. I can fix cars, do small engine repair. And his response was, no, you can't. It was clear that he had this, he had this Proud Boys type worldview. I don't think he ever called himself a Proud Boy, but he was unwilling to accept anything beyond his own preconceptions of who I was and what I was capable of. and what I thought of things, and continue to just be insulting, but insulting in this like ham-fisted way. Like you can tell me that I'm, like, oh, you can't do that, but if I know I can, there's no point in trying to like denigrate me for not being able to do something I know I can do. People like that, where it's clear that they don't listen. Yeah, that's kind of when I check out with those people. Oh, yeah. An anime video in the comment section has discussed. Yeah, just it devolves into like people debating economics. Yeah, in the section of an anime video. I mean, what else? Yeah, they have a pet issues they try and bring their conversation back to. Yep, definitely. But just thinking, though, one time, way back in the day, this must have been, if not the late 90s and the early 2000s, I was hanging out with one of my friends from, like high school. I don't remember how old I was at the time, late teens. And this was back in the day when audio chat was still a thing. Like audio chat was kind of like the height of technology before you had live streams and all this stuff. And we used to go into chat rooms and troll people because we were, 16, 17-year-old jerks, basically. But I remember there was this one chat room that we try and go to, and it was just like a game of how fast can we be blocked and or muted by people, because it was something like, women have orgasms on microphones. And every now and then there would be someone that at least usually sounded like a woman who would get on the mic and pretend to start moaning or whatever, and that would be the moment where we would start blasting music, and then you just see in the stream it'd be like block, mute. I don't remember if it was block or mute, but whatever. Like people went crazy. You would just see this cascade of people that would block us as we blasted music to step on the mic of whatever woman was faking an orgasm on audio. And for whatever, being 17-year-old guys at the time, we just found this absurdly amusing to troll people like that. Let's see. He's a real advocate of literacy. For me, with that whole discussion with Gerbs, right? My whole thing is that he's arguing for like a hypothetical. For example, when he asked about, well, how do you think that America got to be the way it is? It's like, I don't, regardless of how well capitalism or regulation or government investment in infrastructure works, I mean, regardless of any of those, value questions or questions of efficacy of those sorts of policies, I just don't think, historically speaking, that you could describe the economy of America from the beginning till now as a place of pure markets and like the sort of worldview that he's talking about, as far as I can tell, has never really existed. So it's like there's always been government involvement to one degree or another. It was never there has always been other factors in the economy that keep it from being this ideal that you're talking about. Could you at least acknowledge some degree of nuance to the actual history? Yeah, human beings are infrastructure. No, yeah, exactly. In the public education system, I mean, the problem with the sort of views that he was espousing is that it's like they're almost incapable of acknowledging that there are, if not entirely positive sides to what the role of government in society and the economy, then it's not just clearly this net negative. And also, I mean, my whole fundamental thing is that when he talks about there's always this excuse making for markets, so oh yeah, it's great because it leads to lower prices and greater wealth, but it's like, and yes, and then that wealth accumulates, and then that wealth is becomes a form of power, and that power is leveraged either to create monopolies and or to bend government policy in its favor. It's like if you follow the path of if you follow the path of self-interest and the internal logic to its conclusion, then it doesn't lead where you think it seems to lead. It's like they're trying to say that a zero-sum game is an infinite game that doesn't need referees and can just continue in perpetuity and can never devolve, can never become a broken system based on breaking the meta, or however you want to put it. I know I'm putting it in like gamer terms here, but an unregulated system of markets and capitalism, there are many ways that it could just self-destruct under its own logic. And to be unable to even acknowledge that, to me, it's like this, radical is not the right word. It's this kind of stubborn ideology, like ideological conviction that just resists all evidence to the contrary. When someone mentions Venezuela, I honestly, anybody know of a good book that could, in a non BS fashion, explain in detail what went on in Venezuela? What went on with the Venezuelan economy. That's not just like, look at the evils of socialism, because I know a fair amount about it, but it's all in my mind. It all feels loose and disparate, and I feel like I should deep dive that. I guess, as the kids say nowadays, something that will bring it together in a way that's
Do you agree with David that it may be hard to maintain the level of hatred we've had abroad in the land?
I hope so. And I hope so because the level of hatred is not being pushed by the President of the United States anymore. That we have the exact opposite.
So, Nico, you say you keep driving people further into the hole by giving the rich all the money they then hoard. Eventually, society is going to snap. The paradigm will break. Yeah, I'm definitely inclined to agree with you. I think that every society has like a discontentment threshold, and the more the people are, depending on how you want to look at it, above or below that threshold, the more the fabric of society starts to tear. And again, just going back to the problem with talking to people like Herbs, it's not like he's just some troll or some a-hole like I've dealt with countless times, but it's like a lot of people who are just in love with the idea of the free market can't accept that if you have a problem like healthcare, for example, and tens of millions of people have either can't afford it or they have no health care, inadequate health care, that when tens of millions of people have a problem in a democracy, that it's like it's just like electricity trying to find ground, or water trying to find its level. Like something is going to come of that. In a democracy, when you have tens of millions of people with a unifying problem, they call that a constituency. So of course, people are going to seek remedies by whatever outlet they can. And if there aren't market solutions, which, given the nature of healthcare, there often aren't, then they're going to seek their only other option, which is some sort of government solution. Now, obviously, there are some going to be people who are not going to worry about it, and so it's not going to be 100% everyone having the same problem and everyone applying political pressure. But there's a lot of people on the right who they try and rationalize away the sorts of problems that Democrats talk about, be it healthcare, education, and they sort of just go up their own ass with this talk of, free markets and why government regulation, spending bad, all these things. But it's like, yeah, just as it's like incentives and motivation. And when you have a large segment of the society who, for this is a problem, you better start coming up with a solution. If you have a society where tens of millions of people are starving, then you better be on guard for some sort of revolution, like in France. If you just take a let them eat cake attitude, then you're probably going to end up on a guillotine. It's attempting to just dismiss societal problems is you cannot bury your head up your own ass with these theories of efficient markets and the magic invisible hand's going to solve all our problems. And you can't necessarily, and you could say similar things about, leftists waiting around for fully automated utopian communism or whatever, deluxe luxury automated communism, right? Let's see.
Years of President Trump, it's nice to see something different. Just 5 or 6 hours from now, we will probably see a slew of executive orders coming down from President Biden, including rejoining the World Health Organization, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, reversing Trump's ban on migrants from majority Muslim countries, etc. So, I'm looking ahead a little bit, and I think very quickly we'll be into the politics of this presidency after what's been a very nice day, and thus far, thankfully, no incidents of violence or unrest.
So, Eliana Johnson, are you forecasting a very short honeymoon that will end with the signing of these executive orders that Yamiche tells us is coming? What did she say? 17 executive signing statements in the next hour or two.
I think Biden will have a bit of a honeymoon. Certainly, you can see in the media's response already there's a different relationship between the White House and the press corps, a friendlier and more congenial one. But to get anything meaningful through in terms of legislation, Biden and Harris will need to partner with congressional leaders, most importantly, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and they're going to have to strike some cooperation.
Some of this stuff, like, okay, what she's saying, maybe I watched too much stuff like this, but I've been hearing a lot of the same stuff for the past week, and yeah. What time is it? Wow, it's been almost 3 hours. I think I should try and find some sort of natural stopping point, because I would like to eat lunch sooner rather than later.
Pushback from Republicans on everything from the president's now stimulus legislation, or his promotion of the stimulus, and on his immigration legislation. Now,
All right, so what's everybody going to do with their next $1,400 check? That's, yeah. Or do you think the Republicans will be able to somehow stop that from happening? Start whispering in Joe Manchin's ear. You have been for the last 9 months. What? They got all the presidents together except Trump. I wonder what his state funeral is going to be like, assuming that after this next impeachment that he's even given a state funeral. If all the, if they just decide, you know what, we're not going to bother. This guy wasn't big enough to come to the inauguration. We're not going to bother going to his funeral because we don't even want to pretend. Invest in better hardware. Better hardware for what exactly? I'm still waiting to be able to get a new video card and a PS5, but I think it's probably going to be like June or July by the time that happens. What am I going to spend it on? Contrast paints? Honestly, I actually have spent in the last few months. I think I've probably not the last few months, but in the past, let's say 3 to 4 months, I've probably already spent at least $200 on paints. I think I'm going to take a break from buying paints for right now. I just earlier today was working on painting more Necrons, like just before I started this stream, and I still haven't even assembled all the stuff that was in the Indominus box. Last week I was painting more Sisters of Battle, and I still only have like a quarter of that army even bought yet. So maybe that's what I might do with my money is complete my Sisters of Battle army. But who knows? I might just I don't know, save it up for a vacation or something for when things get back to relative normal. I've honestly been saving a lot of money overall over the past while. I lent my brother money recently because he was moving to a new place and he needed money for a deposit, and he had put it on his credit card and didn't, temporarily, and didn't want to pay the interest rates. So I've been kind of like, he slowly started paying me back. So I've kind of been getting, drips and drabs of that. And
away from today.
Yeah, it's like I already, when I've gotten to the point where it's like I'm saving / lending money, I don't like what am I going to do with $1,400? I don't know. Resist the urge to just waste it because they're giving it to me, I guess. So what do you think of the PS5? First of all, how did you get a PS5, and what do you think of it?
We've been talking, Senator Reid, about the difficulty he will face in getting legislation through. Yes, he will be able to sign, we're told, 17 executive orders today, moving aggressively on border, on Paris Climate Accord, the travel ban, and a number of other things. But when it comes to legislation, how hard do you think it's going to be to find the votes necessary there in the Senate and the House?
Well, it's going to be challenging. We have a 50-50 divide in the Senate with the vice president. We will be in control organizationally, but as your commentators have pointed out, the cloture vote is 60 votes, so we have to get 10 votes. first of all, there's no one who's got more sort of inside experience at working with the Senate coming to the presidency than President Biden. That'll help. And I think also, too, he's a realist. I mean, I think he will announce and promote sort of a bold program, and then work hard to get the guts of that program through, if you will. And it's going to take reaching out, and it's also going to take, frankly, engaging the public. The one thing that moves.
So what I'm hearing you saying about getting the PS5 and Shafts, you getting the 370 is that you sold your soul to Satan. Is that correct? I have a PS4, and it on one hand, I'm not super worried about getting the PS5 because there aren't any games for it that I want yet. But the PS4 that I have is kind of one of the older ones that doesn't do 4K. So it's almost like I want 4K. Like the games that I have that support 4K, I'd like to be able to play them in 4K, and just have a more powerful system in general. But I don't have I could, in theory, just go buy a PlayStation 4 Pro, but that would be a waste of money when I can just spend the extra and get a PS5. So as far as the PC goes, I don't need it to be 4K because I don't have a 4K PC monitor. This is what, 1440. So is the 370 decent for 1440?
W. Bush going in the door just now with his wife Laura Bush, and of course President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle, all going in. They were there to witness within a few feet.
Biden's in his late 70s.
Newly sworn in President Joe Biden and newly sworn in Vice President Kamala Harris laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown, that most sacred place at Arlington National Cemetery, where Americans have been laid to rest for decades and decades, who've made the ultimate sacrifice for this country, who've served in the United States military in the different branches,
I think it was originally Robert E. Lee's property.
For this country. The next, this was the first ceremony to take place outside the Capitol after the swearing in, which we've been watching It's now about 2:45 Eastern time from here. The new president, the new vice president will go to the White House. But there they won't simply pull up to the White House. There's going to be a small ceremony moving from 15th Street, which is about 2 blocks from the White House, with a military escort, and they will walk that block and a half, 2 blocks. I'm here with Jim Fallows.
Somebody was asking about Biden's age. I just want to say that there's been this whole thing of like, oh, he's senile, and there are certain moments like, you know, when you have certain like free market libertarian people talking about, you know, if we just had no minimum wage at all, blah blah, and you almost want to ask them like, have you ever worked anywhere? And it's almost one of those situations where people, you know, claiming Biden is senile. It's like, have you ever actually encountered and spent time with somebody suffering from, you know, things like senility? I understand it. You get it. Like, he's almost 80, and a lot of people view that as old. But I've had family members older than that who their wits were still completely together. And I've also known people and family members who their wits were not quite together. And I've also seen Biden speak at length. And when you take into account the fact that he has a stutter, this idea that he's like, oh, he's senile, oh, where am I? It's, you know, people carp on that. It's to me seems incredibly implausible. Like it's as if they've never encountered someone with senility.
I believe he's on the phone. Are we going to get to see your smiling face, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey? There you are. You are watching all of this and paying close attention. What does it mean to you, what you've been seeing today?
I think that this has even deeper meaning than I think the normal sense of patriotism, I think, for all Americans when they witness this incredible, cherished tradition. And I think the reason why, and I had a lot of conversations when I was sitting on the bleachers with colleagues, is I think all of us felt such a deep sense of hurt from January 6th. And that this was, for many of us, the beginning of healing and the rekindling of hope for who we can be as a nation and where we could get to. And Biden's words so resonated well, I think, with the hearts and aspirations of many of us on both sides, that somehow we can bring an end to what he called the uncivil war and find common ground and get things done that better America.
I wonder if this boat here is like, you know, some sort of military patrol.
What you know about him and Vice President Harris that gives you hope that we can move beyond this?
I've been blessed to get to know both of them. And
let's see. I'm still surprised that there are still 14 people watching this.
Joe Biden, I don't know if you remember Judy.
I'm sure they're all here for the arguing about free market economics.
All of us who ran, and I've had this conversation with everybody from Pete Buttigieg to Andrew Yang to Elizabeth Warren. We were all kind of struck by Joe Biden's ability in private moments to rise above it and be a statesperson above all of us. He has this natural sense of grace and
Public speaking isn't natural for everyone. Like, aside from the fact that I've had a tiny glass of champagne, right? Even speaking, even ad-libbing like this, as I'm doing now, I find moments where I'm kind of stuttering and going, and then I try and make a point, and my mind starts to go derp. And then after 3 hours and 13 minutes, or you start to go like your brain. There's different like stages that your brain goes through as you're doing something like this.
I don't mean to be challenging you more, but is it enough to have a good approach and, as you say, grace and a willingness to engage in this almost poisonous atmosphere that we've been witnessing and living through?
Well, look, we will never escape.
Yeah, your mind starts to go GURPS 96. Yeah.
Some of my nieces and nephews are showing the place where the caning of Sumter happened. Literally, somebody beat down.
When he told Trump to shut up, man. Yeah. I see. That's the thing. I don't know if I could get on stage with somebody like Trump, because I would show no decorum. I'd be like, you think you can insult? Like, you want to see who can insult someone more, motherfucker? Well, let's do it.
It's not that we're going to escape that in Washington, but I do believe this appeal to the better angels of our nature is coming after a time where you saw such a brutal breaking and even a defeat of our country. Maya Angelou said, we must face many defeats, but never be defeated. We faced a defeat on January 6th.
Is this? Did I finish?
We eulogized yesterday on the Senate floor Brian Sicknick, an officer who gave the last best measure of his devotion, dying for his country in defense of his capital. That has had an effect on our body. That has had an effect on members on both sides of the aisle. And so it often out of tragedy, whether it was 4 girls dying in a bombing in Birmingham or Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner dying in Mississippi, often from low points like that comes a reawakening that we are still one people and still one nation, and have to find a way, as Joe Biden edged us on today, have to find a way to give the greatest testimony to our nation is our ability to find that common ground and move together to higher ground.
Beyond these executive orders that he's signing today involving masking and the Paris Climate Accord and the border wall, rescinding the travel ban on predominantly Muslim countries, what do you think is the most urgent? What do you see as the most urgent things that he needs to tackle, get done?
I mean, he mentioned 400,000 Americans dead. We lost 600,000 or so.
I don't think that people are talking about clowns in John Wayne Gacy. I don't think that John Wayne Gacy, as far as I know, was in his pogo costume when he murdered his victims. I don't think that's how he got victims. It usually involved tricking them into let me show you a trick with handcuffs, and then once he had them handcuffed, guess what? The trick was that you're not getting out of the handcuffs. That was just one of the. I don't think that. But who knows? I mean, there were a lot of his victims that we just don't know all the details of. So, but I wonder because people don't seem to like clowns, and so you kind of wonder. You kind of wonder why that's still a thing, but it's like you wonder about the people who get into that, right? Like I had a friend in high school, and she apparently did the clown thing, but I never saw her in a clown thing. But she was showing me she had like a card. And it said she was a Christian clown. I'm like, what is that? What does that mean, a Christian clown? And she's like, it means I don't drink and I don't smoke and swear. I'm like, is that something common for clowns doing children's parties to do? Like, what was that, the episode of The Simpsons where they catch Krusty doing things? Or, no, it wasn't Krusty. It was like the guy who replaced Krusty, and he was like a ventriloquist. And he's like, oh, those little SOBs. And they ruin his career after they catch him on a hot mic calling the kids SOBs. Like, I don't know. Gabbo, yeah. I miss when The Simpsons was good. Don't you guys miss when The Simpsons was good? Every now and then I'll watch like a newer episode, and it's kind of like mildly amusing. But the only thing that I'll watch, regularly is the Halloween episodes. Some years I'll just like rewatch all of the Halloween episodes. But then I gotta take a break from it from a couple of years. But I'll always catch up on whatever the latest Halloween episode was.
The pantheon of great black women in history, from Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer and Sojourner Truth and Rosa Parks.
Okay.
She is now a part of that pantheon, and she will do honor to that legacy and to the generations to come.
And finally, because she ran for president before, do you expect she's going to run again? And what about Cory Booker?
Well, I will say about Kamala Harris, God's got plans for her.
Yeah, I think she's basically the heir apparent at this point. It'd be interesting to see if Biden goes for 2 terms. I mean, there are some people who talk about that. And what nightmare that the Republicans will vomit up next. If it will be like Ted Cruz, probably. Oh, it's after a while, after watching this for 3 hours, it gets. I know I got this like basically muted, but after a while, it gets a bit difficult to listen to people, even as well-meaning as they are. They just talk in these very serious tones of these platitudes of the sacredness of American democracy and how this sacred transcendent of democracy and liberty America violated by Trumpist insurrectionists and this moment in history. It's like no wonder people hate the average American hates politics. It's so many of these people, it's just like, can you just speak like a normal person? And even though Trump did not speak like a normal person, he spoke like a complete fucking asshole. At least he had a there's definitely a contingent, there's a part of the average person who's like, man, these people are really full of themselves, and look at this Trump guy. Now, obviously, I don't know how they could swing to the other podium and see, swing to the other pendulum and take somebody who's completely crass as some sort of antidote to the self-important platitudes of your typical politician. But it's, I'm not entirely bewildered by the sentiment. Candor, yeah. I think that Republicans have cucked themselves into needing a real personality, aka untrained lunatic. Yeah, maybe. I mean, they're basically on a downward spiral of being a minority party. It's pretty clear that they reached an inflection point where it's like, we can either change as a party or we can double down. And they're like, yeah, let's double down. Lyndon B. Johnson vibe? What do you mean by that? Because I've heard stories of Lyndon Johnson that I'm not even sure exactly how many of them are actually true. But he was kind of a bastard. But he did some good things by being a bastard, like whipping votes for the Civil Rights Act. Conversations on the toilet with the staff. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. So you probably heard the same. Spoiler alert: the B stands for big. So you probably heard some of the same rumors that I have. This is whip his dick around and be like, "You gonna do what I say? Cause I got a big dick, boy." Like, But is that even like? Who knows even if that's even true? He's basically a totally toxic Chad who would intimidate people with the size of his Johnson. Yeah, I've heard those rumors too.
We need diversity. We need inclusion. And the message today with President Biden was so clear. It's all about being united, being together as a country. I think he is the right person at the right time. I think Kamala Harris is the right person at the right time. They are the right leaders for us in this new chapter, since particularly January 6th with domestic terrorists invading our capital. And I think hopefully this will
Okay, these
bring
people
us
aren't pompous enough. Let's go back to NBC. We need to up our pompousness quotient. Amy Klobuchar, she's all right.
And their spouses up on the stage, and the respect. So, I don't agree with him on a lot of things, that is clear. But I think he did his job today, and he left the Capitol with respect for the incoming administration.
Oh, yeah. So we definitely cannot be complacent about what brought about Trump and the fact that it has not gone away. I was thinking about earlier today, I don't know how many of you have ever read the book Friday Night Lights. Now, it was a television show, and I've never seen the television show, but and it was also a movie, but I also get the distinct impression that the movie and the television show bear only a superficial resemblance to the book. And I want to re-listen to the audiobook, but in my mind, it sticks out as one of my all-time favorite nonfiction books. Because even though I think it was written in the late 80s, maybe the early 90s, it talks about what I would say is Trump's America before what we could call even as Trump's America. And obviously there are a lot of different people who vote for Trump for different reasons. I mean, there are plenty of wealthy suburbanite people who like my tax cuts, and the people who reflexively vote Republican because they believe, the Joe Biden socialists are gonna, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, Friday Night Lights represents a lot of what you would call Trump's America. And I've been thinking about it recently. I'm going to only give you like a really loose version of this because it's something I want to make an actual video about. But I feel that I keep hearing this thing that Joe Biden couldn't possibly have gotten 80 million votes. How could so you think that, but you also believe that Donald Trump, who had a 30-something% approval rating, or roughly 38% approval rating for his entire presidency, got 10 million more votes than the last time he ran for president. There are some obvious reasons. It was this record participation in the election and historic in a lot of ways. But I feel that a lot of the people in that mentality of, how could he have possibly gotten 80 million votes? You look at the people who voted for Trump. You look at the map at the counties that went for Trump, and it's almost entirely rural areas, maybe some suburban areas, and they're sort of like Odessa, Texas, and the town. They're places like what's talked about in books like Friday Night Lights and this novel called Ohio. That is another. It's a great novel, but it's also dark. If you haven't read it, give my 2 thumbs up recommendation to that novel. But I feel like a lot of the people, there was all this talk about people living in a bubble, but a lot of the people who can't grasp the fact that the country isn't a microcosm of their shitty little hometown where, the high school is a jockocracy and the town is a good old boys club of the washed up former football players or whatever, and all the people that they bullied and made fun of in high school that all got the hell out of their little hometown as soon as they could, all went to the cities and elsewhere. They went off to college and they went off to cities and they congregated elsewhere, and that their little hometown of high school football and good old boys local politics and everything else is not a microcosm of the rest of America, and that it's like the tables have turned, and now all the people that they bullied all throughout high school, they're the ones running America, they're the ones controlling culture, and they're just like this has been made aware of to them through social media, through Obama winning the presidency, and they don't recognize America because they confused their shitty little hometown for being a microcosm of America. I'll try and articulate that better in like an actual video. But it's just been something I've been thinking about recently. Yeah, I mean, right-wing media obviously is a major part of, the last 30 plus years of just this constant Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, all these right-wing personalities, all this demonization of the left. That's
It was a great moment.
Is that
This has been an interesting day in that weather-wise, we've had a little bit of everything. We've had sun, we've had rain, we've had some snow. Now we've got wind gusts of up to 48 miles per hour.
Are they giving the weather? Giving the weather. Okay. Yeah, and they call people living on the coast insular. Yeah, exactly. It's like, America is not shithole West Virginia or wherever. And it's interesting going around, driving around certain parts of this country. And there have been so many times when I've been in places and I look around and I just go like, why do people live here? Why does this town exist? Like, I can understand how that town might have come to exist, but you can tell that you go to areas where the small town, their economy seems to consist of like a gas station and a Dollar General, and whatever reason that there was in the past that supported that town, is long gone, and then they wonder why they've been economically left behind. It's like, well, because the geographical area, the town that you live in, and the geographical area that you specifically live in was rendered economically obsolete decades ago. Even if factories did want to come back to America, they probably wouldn't choose where you live. And obviously, I mean, it's not everywhere, but I don't know how many times in my life I've been places where it's just like, why does this town exist? What is their economy? And I remember thinking that because I grew up in upstate New York, and we would go, oftentimes we would go camping and traveling to places in the Adirondacks, and there was this one particular place that we would go to near Lake Placid and Saranac Lake, and so there was always this particular route, and the more I would sort of look, I was very fascinated about like looking and memorizing the details of this route that we took. And at one point, it just struck me, I don't know how old I was, maybe like 10 years old or whatever, where I was just like, where do these people work? Because I knew where all the shops and the businesses were. We had spent, we'd gone this route for years, and like I said, kind of memorized the details, and it wasn't near anything. And and that's what a lot of the Adirondacks is like. And speaking of another book, what is that book called? The Sweet Hereafter by Russell Banks. He gets into, there's like one particular passage in that book where he talks about kind of the condition of the economy in that area, and I think he was very spot on. But of course, I think he also lived in that area too. But that's a lot. It's just so much of America. It's people like cut off from where they live is economically irrelevant, and then they wonder why they're in why their circumstances are what they are. It's just.
hours and the clock's ticking because they're literally on their way right now. Can you bring us in, give us any details on what that whole process is like? You've lived through it.
Sure, I've lived through it a couple of times, and it's something we affectionately call at the White House organized chaos. I mean, the 100 or so members of the team of the resident staff under the direction of the chief usher all have a list of responsibilities that they are responsible for in terms of cleaning the house, which in the COVID world, it's probably, an extra layer of precaution. But then having
people talking about Judge Dredd. There's something that I've noticed in military science fiction, and I think it might just be, 'cause I have a secret soft spot for military science fiction, but even in The Expanse to a certain extent, there's this whenever they try and paint this dystopia of why Private so-and-so joins the Space Marines and goes off and fights the aliens, they always seem to paint a very similar picture of life on Earth. And it's always like, oh, people living in welfare slums, like in I think it was the Judge Dredd remake, right, where they were living in these big, council block places, and even in The Expanse they have this, most billions of people on Earth are living off of some form of universal basic income and all these things, and there's always there's some vast welfare system always plays into the dystopian world that they depict in these in a lot of military science fiction and things like that. It's like they can't imagine any other reason. It's like they got to be some kid from some slum where everyone, lives on the government dole. They can't, and so they join the Space Marines. Yeah, cyberpunk or Judge Dredd, mega corporations control everything. It's like cyberpunk. It's dystopian. Yeah, I'm more interested in the dystopias that imagine just like everything is privatized, run by mega corporations. Because that's just, to me, that's just as likely the outcome of unfettered capitalism as the kind of what about a world where everyone's living on welfare?
Virtual parade. Andrea, what's your understanding of what this parade looks like and how it's so different?
Well, one difference is going to be, of course, that you don't have contributions, live contributions from all over the country, but there will be virtual contributions. But there will be two drumming groups, the Howard University drum group for, of course, the alma mater of the marching band and drum corps from Howard University for Kamala Harris, the vice president, and also from the University of Delaware for Joe Biden. So that will be two big components of it. I also wanted to comment on Jill Biden, Lester, because I was talking to her team. She is already appointed, and that person is already starting the Joint Forces Military Families Organization that she co-founded with Michelle Obama when they were First Lady and Second Lady, and that's going to be a big part of her efforts. It's a private sector as well as nonprofits and military families to help military families with their adjustments, with their education, with housing, with health care. She's also has long been committed to cancer, long before Beau. I knew her through breast cancer work that she had started when Joe Biden was a senator, and she had friends in Delaware who had been suffering from breast cancer. So she has been active.
Yeah, speaking of universal income, cyberpunk, and there being no jobs, have any of you ever read a book called Bullshit Jobs, A Theory? Because that was another book that I re-listened to the audiobook when, there was the first wave of shutdowns. And then I re-listened to part of it again relatively recently. And aside from aside from the creation of money, that's one of my kind of pet pet subjects of interest is the idea of work and jobs and the way in which the way in which things like automate, we in theory should be working less, and the whole working from home thing should have happened a lot sooner, and how there's often a divide between, people who do real work and like there's like tiers of work, and that's kind of what the book partly alludes to that. But as we saw, the whole thing about like essential workers and the shutdown and stuff like that, is that one, we saw that a lot of people could work from home when they were like, no, we need authoritarian supervision over everyone, otherwise you won't achieve maximum productivity, and just the dysfunction of the workplace, which I guess is another side topic when people talk about the efficiency of economic markets. It's like, yeah, except we've reached a point where most industries are dominated by corporations that are institutions that have internally all kinds of dysfunction. Pretty much, I think dysfunction ends up being a outcome of pretty much any institution. But sometimes it's things like a lack of vision on a part of the leadership causes an entire industry to just be destroyed. And I'm sure that if what's his name was still here, he'd be talking about, well, this is part of the creative destruction of capitalism or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. See, I've already lost track of where I was going with this, which means I probably need to end the stream soon and go eat lunch. But yeah, just the whole thing surrounding jobs and as it was called in the book, like the bullshitization of the economy and of work, and people having useless jobs. I don't think I've ever had like a useless job in the sense that the book is talking about, but it's still a fascinating subject. Another problem with society demanding experience for entry-level jobs. Yeah, exactly. That reminds me of another book that I read not that long ago. I think it was called, what was it called? Oh, man. It was called... trying to think here. I gotta mute this so I can think properly. It'll probably come to me, but basically it was written by, I want to say a Harvard professor. It was somebody who taught at an Ivy League school, basically making the point that the economy had shifted in such a way whereas most of the economic gains were being made by elite workers who were it was something, I think at the book, the title had something to do with meritocracy, something about meritocracy. Maybe it was called the meritocracy trap or something like that. But basically how the economy has shifted to having most of the income gains coming from people who had gone to elite schools, who become hedge fund managers. And the book made some interesting points. A lot of the tone of the book, though, was a lot of like, as somebody who's an Ivy League professor who probably knows a lot of the sorts of people he's talking about on a personal level, having taught them, it was a lot of like, oh, these poor workaholic people who have to work 80 hours a week at their hedge fund, and my problem with that is, again, it's just like the poor little overachievers with have to work 100 hours a week for more money than they could possibly be justified in making. I don't really buy into his arguments, and the tone of it kind of grated on me, but it still made some interesting points nonetheless. Yeah. So anyway, speaking of senility, and I feel like at the point where I'm trying to make a point, and I realize my brain, like the gears are slipping in my brain, which means my blood sugar is probably getting low, amongst other things. So I think that it is time for me to end this stream and go eat lunch. And yeah. So thank you to everyone who hung out and listened to me argue with somebody about free market economics and the other rambling topics here. And have a good whatever time it is, and our long national nightmare is finally over. Later, everybody.